Welcome, wanderers. As the moon hangs heavy and the world outside falls silent, let the shadows in your room deepen and your guard fall. For the next 3 hours, we're diving into tales of the chilling and the unknown. Stories specifically crafted to lull you into an uneasy rest. So dim the lights, pull up your blankets, and prepare to drift into a slumber haunted by whispers from the dark. Comment down below where you're listening from and drop a like in the name of fear. The whispering walls of Blackwood Manor. The old Ford Bronco coughed its last breath at the edge of the overgrown driveway, a final metallic wheeze that seemed to echo the weariness in Liam's own bones. Dust, thick and red from miles of unpaved road, coated every surface, blurring the lines between the truck, the dying light of the setting sun, and the skeletal trees that clawed at the bruised sky. Before him, shrouded in a perpetual twilight even in the fading afternoon, stood Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just old. It was ancient, a hulking silhouette against the horizon, its gables like jagged teeth, its windows like vacant, staring eyes. Local legend whispered of its former inhabitants, the Blackwood family, who had vanished without a trace over a century ago, leaving behind a legacy of chilling tales and an estate that no one dared to claim. Liam, a freelance photographer specializing in urban decay and the macabre, saw not a haunted house, but a canvas, a challenge, a story waiting to be told through his lens. He grabbed his heavy camera bag, the familiar weight a small comfort against the prickle of unease that had begun to crawl up his spine the moment he turned off the main road. The air grew colder as he approached, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something subtly metallic, like old blood. The iron gates, rusted to a brittle lace, groaned a protest as he pushed them open, the sound a mournful sigh in the stillness. The driveway, once meticulously paved, was now a fractured mosaic of cracked flagstones and tenacious weeds. A lone, gnarled oak, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes, stood sentinel near the crumbling porch, its leaves rustling with an almost human whisper. Liam paused, his hand instinctively going to the small, silver crucifix he always wore beneath his shirt. He wasn't particularly religious, but some places just demanded a little extra protection. The front door, a massive slab of dark, splintered wood, hung ajar, revealing a maw of impenetrable darkness. He pushed it open further, the hinges screaming in agony, a sound that reverberated through the silent house. The air inside was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else, something that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. A faint, cloying sweetness, like forgotten potpourri mixed with the metallic tang he'd noticed outside. He switched on his powerful headlamp, its beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a grand foyer swallowed by shadows. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, draped from the chandelier, which hung precariously, its crystal pendants dulled by a century of neglect. The grand staircase, once a testament to opulence, now sagged precariously, its banister splintered, its steps groaning under the weight of time. "Hello?" Liam's voice, a mere whisper in the vast emptiness, was swallowed instantly, leaving only the sound of his own ragged breathing. He felt foolish, but the silence was oppressive, demanding some kind of vocal intrusion. He began his work, camera clicking, the flash momentarily illuminating forgotten details. A tarnished silver tray on a dust-laden side table, a faded portrait whose eyes seemed to follow him, a moth-eaten tapestry depicting a hunting scene, the figures frozen in an eternal chase. Each click of the shutter felt like a heartbeat, a small defiance against the overwhelming stillness. As he moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots, not just with his weight, but with an unsettling rhythm, as if something else was moving, just out of sight. He entered what must have been the drawing room, its once vibrant wallpaper peeling in grotesque strips, revealing the dark, damp plaster beneath. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and silent, stood in one corner, a sheet of music still open on its stand, the notes faded beyond recognition. He raised his camera, framing a shot of the piano, when a faint, discordant note seemed to drift from its keys. Liam froze, his finger hovering over the shutter button. He waited, straining his ears, but the sound didn't repeat. Just the oppressive silence, punctuated by the frantic drumming of his own heart. He shook his head, dismissing it as his imagination, a trick of the old house and his own frayed nerves. He continued his exploration, his headlamp sweeping through the gloom, revealing a dining room with a massive empty table, its chairs overturned as if a sudden, violent departure had occurred. Then the kitchen, a cavern of rusted appliances and shattered crockery. Each room told a story of abandonment, of lives abruptly interrupted. It was in the master bedroom that the true chill set in. The four-poster bed, its canopy torn and shredded, dominated the room. On the bedside table, a porcelain doll sat propped up, its painted eyes staring blankly into the darkness. Its dress, once pristine, was now grimy and torn. Liam felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Dolls, especially old ones, always unnerved him. This one, however, felt different, felt watched. As he aimed his camera at the doll, a faint scratching sound emanated from inside the wardrobe. It was soft, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood. Liam's breath hitched. He wasn't alone. He wasn't just imagining things anymore. "Hello?" he called out, his voice barely a croak. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was even more profound, more menacing. He took a hesitant step towards the wardrobe, his hand trembling as he reached for the ornate, tarnished handle. He pulled it open with a sudden jerk, revealing not a person, but a cavernous, empty space. The scratching had stopped, but the faint, sweet, metallic smell was stronger here, almost overwhelming. He shone his light into the depths of the wardrobe, seeing nothing but dust motes dancing in the beam. He slowly closed the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He backed away from the wardrobe, his eyes fixed on the doll. Had it moved, or was it just his mind playing tricks? He couldn't be sure. He decided it was time to move on, to explore the upper floors, to get away from the unsettling presence of that doll. The staircase groaned under his weight as he ascended, each step a testament to the house's decay. The upper landing was a maze of shadowy doorways. He chose the first one, pushing open a door that led into what appeared to be a child's nursery. The air here was even colder, carrying a faint, sweet scent, like baby powder mixed with something else, something sickly. A rocking horse stood in the center of the room, its painted eyes chipped, its mane tangled. A crib, its wooden bars splintered, stood against one wall. And on the floor, scattered amongst the dust and debris, were a collection of antique toys. A tin soldier, a wooden train, a small porcelain tea set. Liam's headlamp swept across the room, and then he saw it. On the far wall, faintly visible beneath layers of grime and peeling wallpaper, was a series of childlike drawings. Stick figures, houses, suns, and then, in one corner, a crudely drawn figure with long, spindly limbs and empty, staring eyes. It was unsettling, the kind of drawing that would give you nightmares. He felt a sudden, intense drop in temperature, a cold that seemed to penetrate his very bones. He shivered violently, his breath misting in the frigid air. Then, from the corner of the room, he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible giggle, a child's giggle. Liam spun around, his headlamp darting frantically, but there was nothing, just the rocking horse perfectly still and the empty crib. His blood ran cold. He was definitely not alone. He stumbled back, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had to get out. He had to leave this place. He turned to flee, but as he did, his foot caught on something. He looked down and saw a small wooden block, painted with a single, faded letter, L. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his ankle as he twisted it, sending him sprawling to the floor. His headlamp clattered away, plunging the room into near darkness. Only a sliver of moonlight, filtering through a grimy window, offered any illumination, casting long, distorted shadows. He scrambled to retrieve his headlamp, his fingers fumbling in the gloom. As he reached for it, a small, cold hand brushed against his. He recoiled, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He shone the light, his hand shaking, but there was nothing there, only the wooden block still lying on the floor. He snatched up the headlamp, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ankle. He had to get out, now. He limped out of the nursery, his eyes darting wildly, convinced he saw movement in the periphery of his vision, heard faint whispers carried on the cold air. He stumbled down the grand staircase, each creak of the wood a fresh jolt of terror. He reached the foyer, the front door still ajar, a beacon of hope. He lunged for it, his hand outstretched, when a sudden, violent gust of wind slammed it shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the house. Liam cried out, stumbling back. He tried the handle, but it was stuck, jammed tight. Panic, cold and raw, seized him. He was trapped. He turned, his headlamp sweeping the foyer, and then he saw them. Shadows. Not just ordinary shadows, but shapes that seemed to writhe and coalesce in the corners of the room, growing larger, darker, more defined. They were indistinct at first, like smoke, but then they began to take on forms, tall and slender, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed to tilt at unnatural angles. A low, guttural growl seemed to emanate from the very walls, a sound that vibrated through his chest. The air grew impossibly colder, and the sweet, metallic scent intensified, making him gag. He backed away, pressing himself against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. The shadows advanced, slowly, deliberately, their forms becoming clearer. He could almost make out features now, empty eye sockets, mouths stretched in silent screams. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block them out, trying to convince himself it wasn't real. But the cold was too intense, the growling too real, the scent too pervasive. He opened his eyes, and they were closer now, almost upon him. He screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from his throat, and lunged for the nearest window, smashing his camera against the glass. It shattered with a deafening crash, shards flying inwards. He didn't care about the cuts, the pain. He just needed to escape. He scrambled through the broken window, tearing his clothes, his skin, but he didn't feel it. He landed hard on the overgrown lawn, his injured ankle screaming in protest. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain, and began to run. He ran blindly, stumbling through the darkness. The sounds of the house, the growling, the whispers, the faint, childish giggles echoing in his ears. He didn't stop until he reached the rusted gates, tearing his hands on the sharp iron as he forced them open. He didn't stop until he reached his Bronco, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, a miraculous sound. He slammed the gear into reverse, spinning the truck around, and sped away, leaving Blackwood Manor behind, a dark, malevolent presence against the moonlit sky. He drove for hours, not knowing where he was going, just needing to put as much distance as possible between himself and that house. When the first rays of dawn finally pierced the darkness, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, he pulled over on the side of a deserted road, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked down at his hands, still shaking, and then at his camera bag, which lay on the passenger seat. He hesitated, then reached for it, pulling out his camera. He scrolled through the images he had taken, his heart sinking with each click. The foyer, the drawing room, the dining room, the kitchen, all were there, captured in stark, chilling detail. But then he got to the master bedroom, the image of the porcelain doll, and next to it, barely visible in the shadows, was a faint, translucent figure, a child. Its eyes were dark, empty, staring directly into the lens. He gasped, dropping the camera. He scrolled further to the nursery, the rocking horse, the crib. And then, in the corner where he had seen the crude drawing, was the same translucent figure, standing beside the rocking horse, its head tilted, a faint, chilling smile on its lips. He threw the camera onto the seat, his stomach churning. It wasn't his imagination. It was real. They were real. He looked up, his eyes scanning the horizon, the rising sun, the familiar world. But the world no longer felt familiar, felt tainted. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would never truly escape Blackwood Manor. Its whispers, its shadows, its cold, dead eyes would haunt him forever. And the faint, sweet, metallic scent, he knew now what it was. It was the scent of death, the scent of a presence that had never left. And it was clinging to him, a silent, invisible shroud. He was marked, and Blackwood Manor would always be waiting. The silence of apartment 4B. The rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective, mirroring the neon glow of distant signs. Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose face was etched with too many late nights and too much coffee, adjusted the collar of his trench coat. Beside him, his assistant, the perpetually optimistic and sharp-witted Amelia Vance, shivered slightly, pulling her own jacket tighter. "Another missing person, Miles?" Amelia asked, her breath misting in the cool night air. "This is the third one this month from this building." Miles grunted, his gaze fixed on the imposing, Art Deco apartment complex before them. The building, known as the Obsidian, was a relic of a bygone era, its dark stone facade and gargoyle-adorned ledges casting long, ominous shadows. "Yeah, this time it's a Mr. Arthur Finch from apartment 4B, reported missing by his sister. Said he hadn't answered his phone in 3 days, which was unlike him." They entered the lobby, a grand but unsettling space with a mosaic floor depicting a swirling, abstract pattern that seemed to shift under their feet. The air was heavy, stagnant, carrying a faint, cloying scent that Miles couldn't quite place. It wasn't decay, not exactly. More like old, stale air mixed with something else, something subtly metallic. The elevator creaked its way to the 4th floor, its brass doors groaning open to reveal a dimly lit hallway. The silence here was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the soft scuff of their shoes on the worn carpet. Apartment 4B was at the very end of the hall, its heavy, dark wood door standing out against the lighter walls. Miles knocked, a series of sharp raps that echoed unervingly in the stillness. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. Standard procedure. Then, Miles muttered, pulling a Slim Jim from his kit. Amelia stood back, her eyes scanning the hallway, a prickle of unease beginning to crawl up her spine. The silence felt watchful. With a soft click, the lock gave way. Miles pushed the door open slowly, revealing a maw of impenetrable darkness. He flicked on his powerful tactical flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a small, cluttered living room. The apartment was neat, almost meticulously so, which struck Miles as odd for a man who had seemingly vanished without a trace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with dusty tomes. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on a coffee table, a pen resting beside it. A teacup sat on a coaster, a faint ring of dried tea at the bottom. It was as if Arthur Finch had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. "No signs of forced entry," Amelia observed, her voice hushed.
Nostragel.
"It's like he just evaporated." Miles moved deeper into the apartment, his flashlight sweeping through the rooms. The kitchen was spotless, not a dish out of place. The bedroom was equally tidy, the bed neatly made. There was no note, no indication of where Finch might have gone. As they entered the bathroom, Amelia gasped. On the pristine white tile floor, directly in front of the bathtub, was a small, dark stain. It was almost invisible against the dark grout, but under the harsh beam of Miles's light, its reddish-brown hue was unmistakable. "Blood," Miles stated, his voice grim. He knelt, examining it closely. Not much, a few drops. Oh, dry. But if there was no struggle, Amelia began, her brow furrowed. "Exactly," Miles said, standing up. "It doesn't fit. Unless he was injured and then left." They continued their search, a growing sense of dread settling over them. The apartment felt unnaturally cold, despite the temperate night outside. And that faint, metallic scent, it was stronger here, mixed with the cloying sweetness Miles had noticed in the lobby. In the study, a small, unassuming room filled with more books and a heavy wooden desk, Miles's flashlight beam fell upon a framed photograph. It was a picture of Arthur Finch, a mild-mannered man with kind eyes, standing beside a much younger woman, presumably his sister. But what caught Miles's attention was the background, a blurry image of the apartment building itself, the obsidian, and in one of the windows, barely discernible, was a faint, distorted face. A child's face. Miles frowned, leaning closer. "Amelia, take a look at this." Amelia peered at the photo. "It's just a reflection, Miles. Or maybe a smudge on the glass." "Maybe," Miles conceded, but a chill ran down his spine. He had a bad feeling about this place. He moved to the desk, his light sweeping over its surface. A leather-bound journal lay open. Miles picked it up, his gloved fingers carefully turning the brittle pages. The handwriting was neat, precise. Finch's daily entries. As he read, a new layer of dread began to unfold. The early entries were mundane. Grocery lists, appointments, observations about the weather. But as the dates progressed, a subtle shift occurred. Finch began to write about the apartment, about the sounds he heard at night. Day 7. Heard a faint scratching in the walls tonight. Thought it was mice. Odd, for such a well-maintained building. Day 14. The scratching is louder and different, more rhythmic, like fingernails. Day 21. I hear whispers now, faint at first, but they're growing clearer. They call my name. They know my name. Miles's eyes darted to Amelia, who was now reading over his shoulder, her face pale. Day 28. The cold. It's always cold now, even when the heat is on full blast. And the smell, that sweet, sickening smell, like old flowers and something else, something metallic. Day 35. I saw them, in the shadows, just glimpses, elongated forms. They move when I'm not looking. They're always watching. The entries became more frantic, the handwriting more erratic. Day 42. They want me. They want to play. They want to take me to their game. I can hear the child's laughter now. So clear. So close. The last entry was dated 3 days ago, the day Arthur Finch was reported missing. Day 45. They're here. They're in the room. They're everywhere. The child, it's reaching for me. Its eyes are empty. I can't breathe. The game, it's starting. Miles closed the journal, his hand trembling. The silence in the apartment now felt suffocating, pregnant with unseen horrors. The cold was bone deep, and the sweet, metallic scent was overwhelming. Suddenly, a faint, childish giggle echoed from the hallway. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Miles and Amelia spun around, their flashlights darting frantically. The hallway was empty, but the giggle seemed to linger, a cold, mocking sound. "Miles," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, from the bedroom, came a loud, guttural growl, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. Miles reacted instantly, pushing Amelia behind him. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. He moved towards the bedroom, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the oppressive darkness. As he reached the doorway, the growling stopped. The dragging sound ceased. The room was plunged into an eerie silence. Miles cautiously stepped inside, his light sweeping the room. The bed was still neatly made. The furniture was undisturbed. But on the pristine white sheets, directly in the center of the bed, was a single, small wooden block. It was painted with a faded, childlike drawing of a stick figure with long, spindly limbs and empty, staring eyes. And next to it, the letter F. Miles felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He knew what that F stood for. Finch. He heard a strangled cry from behind him. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Amelia was standing in the doorway, her face contorted in terror, her flashlight beam fixed on something in the living room. Miles rushed back, his own light following hers. In the middle of the living room, where moments before there had been nothing but empty space, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and twisted. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and where its face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of shadow. And beside it, a smaller, childlike figure, its eyes dark, empty, staring directly at them. The sweet, metallic scent was overpowering now, making Miles's eyes water, his stomach churn. The temperature plummeted, and he could see his own breath misting in the frigid air. The whispers began again, a cacophony of mournful voices, swirling around them, calling their names. Miles, Amelia. The figures began to advance, slowly, deliberately, their movements jerky and unnatural. The childlike figure raised a small, translucent hand, reaching out towards them. "Run!" Miles roared, grabbing Amelia's arm. They stumbled back, tripping over furniture, their flashlights clattering to the floor, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the faint, distorted light from the street lamps outside offered any illumination, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced with the advancing figures. They scrambled towards the front door, their hands fumbling with the jammed lock. The whispers grew louder, the growling more intense. The cold was unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on them. Miles finally managed to force the lock open with a desperate shove. They burst out into the hallway, gasping for breath, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They didn't look back. They ran, stumbling down the stairs, ignoring the elevator, their only thought to escape the suffocating horror of apartment 4B. They burst out into the street, gulping down the cool, clean night air. They didn't stop until they reached their unmarked car, fumbling with the keys, their hands shaking uncontrollably. Miles slammed the car into gear and sped away, leaving the obsidian behind, a dark, malevolent presence against the city lights. They drove in silence for a long time, the trauma of the night settling over them. When they finally pulled over on a quiet street, the first hint of dawn painting the sky, Amelia broke the silence, her voice trembling. What was that, Miles?" Miles stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, Amelia. I've never seen anything like it." He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper. "But I know one thing. Arthur Finch didn't just vanish. He was taken to play their game." He looked at Amelia, his eyes haunted. "And I think they wanted us to join." Amelia shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. The silence of apartment 4B, the sweet, metallic scent, the whispers, the empty eyes of the child. They would never truly leave them. They were marked, and the game they knew was far from over. The flickering fluorescence of Fresh Foods grocery cast long, dancing shadows that usually just made the bruised apples look worse. Tonight, though, they transformed every aisle into a cavernous maw, each towering shelf a silent sentinel in a landscape of dread. It was well past midnight, the witching hour for most sane people, but for me, Liam, the Night Stalker, it was just another Tuesday. A Tuesday that, unbeknownst to me, was poised to shatter my understanding of the ordinary. I was the only soul in the place, or so I desperately tried to convince myself. A shiver, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, traced its way up my spine as I pushed a pallet of canned goods down the pasta aisle. The hum of the refrigeration units, usually a monotonous drone that had lulled me into a stupor countless times, seemed to throb with an unnatural rhythm tonight. It wasn't just a hum. It was a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor, up the soles of my worn work boots, and into my very bones. Then came the sound, a faint, almost insubstantial whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement on a windless night, or perhaps the rustle of an unseen presence just beyond the edge of perception. It emanated from the dairy section, a place usually synonymous with the innocuous scent of pasteurized milk and cool, sterile air. It was so faint I almost dismissed it as the building settling, the size of an old structure in the dead of night, but it held a strange, almost intimate quality, a breath against the silence. I froze, my hands still gripping the cold metal of the pallet jack, my knuckles white with the sudden tension. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy, absurdly small in the vast, echoing silence of the store. Only the amplified hum answered, mocking me. My own breath hitched in my throat, a ragged sound in the oppressive quiet. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, fueled by too much stale coffee, the gnawing loneliness of another graveyard shift, and too many late nights spent in the silent, fluorescent-lit mausoleum of the grocery store. I forced myself to continue stocking, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy, to impose order on the creeping unease. But my eyes darted nervously between the towering shelves, each one a potential hiding place for whatever had whispered. The brightly colored product labels seemed to leer at me, their cheerful slogans twisting into grotesque grins. That's when I saw it. A single shopping cart at the very end of aisle 7, nestled between the wilting organic kale and the dusty bags of gluten-free granola. It was slowly, almost imperceptibly, rolling forward. No one was near it. Not a breath of wind to stir the dust motes in the artificial light. Not a tremor in the floor that could account for its movement. It moved with a silent, deliberate purpose, a ghost of consumerism on a midnight errand. My breath caught in my throat, a cold knot forming in my stomach that felt like a lump of ice. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, half expecting it to be gone. A trick of the flickering light, a figment of my sleep-deprived mind. But no, the cart was still moving, now picking up a sluggish, almost purposeful momentum, heading directly for the meticulously stacked display of imported, artisanal cheeses, a small pyramid of expensive dairy arranged with painstaking care. With a soft, unsettling thud, it nudged the base of the pyramid of aged Gouda, sending a few precious wheels tumbling to the polished floor with a sickening clatter that echoed through the silence like a gunshot. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice a desperate croak this time, louder, more frantic, laced with a fear I couldn't contain. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Silence, a heavy, oppressive silence. Just the persistent hum, which now seemed to vibrate with a predatory quality, a low growl under the skin of the building. I abandoned my pallet, leaving the canned goods scattered across the aisle like fallen soldiers. I hurried towards the produce section, my feet pounding a frantic rhythm on the linoleum, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I rounded the corner, expecting to confront a prankster, a curious night manager I hadn't seen, or a lost, confused customer, I stopped dead. The cart was now perfectly still, a lone sentinel in the dim, unsettling light, its shadow stretching long and distorted behind it, like a predatory creature waiting in ambush. But something was different. A faint, almost sickly sweet smell hung in the air, a cloying blend that reminded me of overripe fruit mixed with something metallic, something vaguely reminiscent of a butcher shop on a hot summer day. And then I saw it, on the gleaming chrome handle of the cart, glistening faintly under the anemic artificial light. A dark, viscous stain. It looked unmistakably like blood. Not the bright, arterial red of a fresh cut, but a deeper, almost brownish hue, like old, congealed blood, dried and tacky to the touch. It had a strange, almost oily sheen. My stomach lurched, threatening to betray me with a rush of bile. I backed away slowly, my eyes glued to the stain, which seemed to shimmer faintly, almost pulsate, in the anemic light, as if it possessed a life of its own. Each step I took backward felt like an immense effort, my legs heavy and unwilling to obey, dragging against the floor. As I retreated, a new sound emerged, cutting through the thick silence. A soft, rhythmic thump-thump-thump coming from the very back of the store, near the ominous stainless steel facade of the walk-in freezers. No, not just thumps. Footsteps. Heavy, wet, barefoot steps, dragging across the polished linoleum, leaving a faint, almost imperceptible slime in their wake. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this place and never look back, to abandon my job, my future, everything, just to escape the burgeoning terror. But a morbid curiosity, or perhaps sheer terror that had paralyzed my better judgment and held me rooted to the spot, compelled me forward. I edged towards the sound, clutching a rogue cucumber I'd picked up from the floor, a pathetic, almost comical weapon against an unknown horror. The air grew colder with each step, the chill emanating from the back of the store, an unnatural, biting cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. And the sweet, metallic scent intensified, growing sickly sweet, cloying, burning my nostrils, an inescapable stench of decay and something else, something raw. The freezer door, a massive stainless steel slab that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, was slightly ajar, a sliver of inky darkness promising an even deeper, more profound chill within. The thumping was louder now, closer, accompanied by a faint, wet squishing sound, like something struggling in mud, or worse, something being dragged. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, revealing the cavernous meat locker interior. Rows of hanging carcasses, their white plastic shrouds gleaming under the single, bare, flickering bulb, swayed almost imperceptibly, like silent, ghostly dancers in a macabre ballet. The air was thick with the overwhelming smell of raw meat and that terrible, sweet, metallic scent, now almost unbearable. And there, at the very back, hunched over a disordered pile of raw ground beef that looked like it had been violently torn from its packaging, was a figure. It was impossibly thin, almost skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long and jointed, draped in what looked like a tattered, blood-stained apron that hung in ragged strips. His back was to me, but I could hear it. A wet, slurping sound, sickeningly loud in the frigid air, punctuated by soft, guttural moans, like an animal in distress, or something far, far worse. A sound of primal, desperate hunger. The sweet, metallic smell was overwhelming here, burning my nostrils, making my eyes water and my throat constrict. My gaze dropped from the horrifying figure to the floor. A thick, dark trail of the viscous liquid led from the ground beef, across the spotless tiles, leaving a grotesque, meandering path that disappeared out into the main aisle, leading back to where I had first seen the rogue cart. It was the same stain on the cart, unmistakable. This wasn't just blood. This was something else. Something that shouldn't be here. Something that defied all logic and sanity. A primal scream tore through my throat, raw and desperate. A sound ripped from the deepest parts of my being. The figure stiffened, then slowly, agonizingly slowly, began to turn. I caught a glimpse of a pale, elongated hand, tipped with dark, jagged nails, and something that looked like a maw, open and wet. I didn't wait to see its face, didn't want to know what unspeakable horror lurked beneath that tattered apron, what vacant eyes might meet mine. I bolted, my feet pounding a desperate rhythm on the linoleum, a frantic tattoo of terror against the silent, watching shelves. The hum of the refrigerators became a roaring in my ears, a siren of pure terror, amplified by the blood pounding in my temples. I didn't look back, didn't dare, fearing that a single glance would solidify the nightmare, make it undeniably real. I just ran, past the aisles of silent, waiting food, each display a silent witness to the nightmare unfolding, towards the distant, beckoning glow of the automatic doors. I burst out into the cool, liberating night air, gasping, my lungs burning, the chill of the freezer still clinging to my skin like an icy shroud. The streetlights seemed impossibly bright, casting long, comforting shadows that were a stark contrast to the twisted ones within. The sounds of the city, usually a mundane cacophony of distant traffic and sirens, were now a symphony of life, a reassuring testament to a world beyond the grocery store's walls, a world where such horrors simply didn't exist. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my old beat-up car a blur of panicked speed, the gas pedal pressed to the floor, my hands aching from gripping the steering wheel. I never went back to Fresh Foods grocer, and to this day, the smell of fresh meat, even in the brightest daylight, brings with it the lingering chill of that impossible, terrifying night, a phantom stain on my memory that no amount of scrubbing, no amount of time, can ever truly erase. The grocery store, once a mundane place, remains forever etched in my mind as a portal to unspeakable dread. The old apartment building, the Oak Haven, wasn't just old. It felt ancient, burdened by a century of lives lived and secrets buried within its crumbling brick facade. I, Elias Thorne, a freelance graphic designer, had taken the cheapest available unit on the 5th floor, a studio apartment overlooking a perpetually rain-slicked alley. The rent was impossibly low, a red flag I'd optimistically ignored. But in New York City in 2025, a bargain was a bargain, even if it came with the faint, persistent smell of dust and something vaguely metallic. My first week was uneventful, filled with the usual unpacking and the relentless hum of the city. My only real complaint was the persistent, almost imperceptible chill that permeated my apartment, even with the rattling radiator blasting. It wasn't just cold. It was a damp, clinging cold that seemed to seep into my bones, no matter how many layers I wore. It was worse in the evenings, a creeping dread that made me pull my threadbare blanket tighter around me. Then came the sounds. At first, I dismissed them as typical old building noises. Pipes groaning, wind howling through loose panes, the distant wail of sirens echoing off brick. But they grew more distinct, more unsettling. A faint, repetitive scratching seemed to emanate from the walls of my bedroom, directly behind my headboard. Not frantic, like a mouse, but slow, deliberate, almost purposeful, like nails dragging on plaster. I tried to rationalize it. Old wiring, settling foundations. But the scratching persisted, a maddening rhythm that often continued for hours, sometimes accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible whimper, like a child crying from a great distance. I'd press my ear against the cold plaster, straining to hear, but the moment I focused, the sound would invariably fade, leaving me in the oppressive, damp silence of my small room. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in fitful, restless bursts. One evening, I was sketching a new logo design, the only light in my apartment coming from my laptop screen. The scratching had started again, louder now, almost directly next to my ear. I slammed my fist against the wall in frustration. "Stop it!" I yelled, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. The scratching ceased. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, from the very core of the wall came a soft, almost amused giggle. It was thin, reedy, undeniably human, yet utterly devoid of warmth or joy. It was the sound of something old laughing. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a pipe. This wasn't the wind. This was something else. I scrambled away from the wall, pulling my laptop with me, my eyes wide and unblinking. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the furthest corner of my living room, the faint glow of my laptop a pathetic shield against the encroaching darkness. The next day, driven by a desperate need for answers, I confronted Mrs. Petrov, the ancient, perpetually scowling building manager who lived on the first floor. Her apartment reeked of mothballs and stale cigarettes. "Mrs. Petrov," I began, trying to sound calm, "I've been hearing strange noises in my apartment, like scratching and voices." Her eyes, roomy and dark, fixed on mine. A long, drawn-out puff of smoke curled from her lips. "Noises?" she rasped, her voice like grinding gravel. "Is old building always noises?" She paused, her gaze unwavering. "You hear voices?" There was a strange emphasis on the word, a subtle shift in her tone that made my skin crawl. "Just a whisper, maybe a giggle?" I stammered, feeling foolish as the words left my mouth. A flicker of something, recognition? Fear? Crossed her weathered face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She took another slow drag from her cigarette. "Don't pay attention to it," she finally said, her voice dismissive, but her eyes held a strange, knowing glint. "Is just the building settling? Is very old building?" The conversation was clearly over. I left her apartment feeling more unsettled than before. Her denial was too quick, too absolute. Confirmed my fears, rather than alleviated them. That night, the activity escalated. The scratching became bolder, tracing intricate patterns that sounded eerily like letters being carved into the plaster. I pressed my ear to the wall again, trembling, and heard what sounded like faint, guttural chanting coming from deep within the building's infrastructure. A low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the floorboards. It was primal, ancient, like nothing I had ever heard, and that clinging, damp cold intensified, bringing with it a new, disturbing scent. The faint, unmistakable smell of decay, like damp earth and something long dead. I couldn't stay in my apartment, not another minute. Grabbing my keys and phone, I fled into the dimly lit hallway, the faint glow of emergency lights doing little to dispel the gloom. The hallway itself felt different. The air was heavier, colder, the scent of decay stronger here. The light from my phone seemed to struggle against the oppressive darkness, barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. As I walked, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud, I noticed something new. On the wall opposite my apartment door, etched faintly into the peeling paint, were a series of symbols. They were the same swirling, intricate designs I had seen in that ancient book in the library, the ones that had haunted my dreams since that night. My blood ran cold, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just my apartment. This was connected. I hurried down the 5 flights of stairs, the chanting growing louder as I descended, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. The stairwell was a vortex of cold, dank air. As I reached the ground floor, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. The main lobby, usually lit by a single weak bulb, was bathed in an eerie, pulsing red light. It flickered erratically, casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the walls. And then I saw the source. The ancient, heavy wooden door to the building's basement was ajar, a sliver of the pulsing red light escaping from within. From that gaping darkness, the smell of decay was overpowering, thick and cloying, making me gag. And the chanting, now a deafening crescendo, was clearly coming from below. It wasn't just chanting anymore. It was a frantic, desperate chorus of voices, layered on top of each other, speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. Yet its tone was unmistakably one of supplication and terror. My legs felt like lead rooted to the spot. Every rational fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run out the main door, to never look back. But the sight of those symbols, the chilling implication that this wasn't just my building, but part of a larger, darker tapestry, held me captive. I had to know. I had to see. Slowly, hesitantly, I pushed the basement door open further. The red light pulsed more intensely, bathing the descending steps in a hellish glow. The air was thick and heavy, like breathing liquid, a suffocating mixture of decay, ozone, and something else. Something distinctly metallic, like rust and old blood. The chanting was deafening, a relentless assault on my sanity, twisting my thoughts, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. I began to descend the creaking, wooden stairs, each step a descent into an ever-deepening abyss of horror. The walls of the stairwell were slick with condensation, gleaming in the pulsing red light. As I went deeper, the temperature plummeted, the chill so profound it felt like needles piercing my skin. The scratching I had heard in my apartment seemed to echo from every direction, multiplied 1,000-fold, as if countless unseen entities were tearing at the very fabric of the building. At the bottom of the stairs, a narrow, unlit corridor stretched into the darkness. The red light pulsed from a vast, open chamber at its end. I edged forward, my hands scraping against the rough, damp brick wall. The floor beneath my feet felt uneven, almost spongy. And then I saw them, faint, dark streaks on the floor, leading towards the red light. They looked like drag marks. The chanting in the chamber swelled, rising and falling in terrifying waves. It was no longer just voices. There were other sounds mixed in. A wet, tearing noise, a soft, squelching sound, and then a low, guttural growl, deep and ancient, that vibrated through the very ground. I reached the entrance to the chamber and stopped, my breath caught in my throat, my eyes wide with disbelief and unspeakable terror. The room was immense, its true size obscured by the pulsing red light and shifting shadows. In the center, on a raised, crudely constructed stone slab, was what looked like a massive dark mass. It pulsed with the same unsettling rhythm as the red light, its surface glistening wetly. From it, thin, almost translucent tendrils snaked outwards, disappearing into the shadows. And kneeling around the slab, their bodies contorted into unnatural angles, their faces obscured by the pulsing light and self-inflicted wounds, were a dozen or so figures. They were chanting, their voices raw and desperate, their hands raised towards the pulsating mass. They were dressed in tattered, archaic clothing, their skin pale and almost translucent. As the red light pulsed, I saw glimpses of something utterly horrifying. Their eyes were not human. They were black, vacant pools, reflecting only the infernal glow. And their mouths were stretched open unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. The smell of decay was overwhelming, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood and something else, something fetid and unholy. Strewn across the floor around the slab were discarded bones, dark stains, and scattered personal effects. A tarnished locket, a child's worn shoe, a broken pair of spectacles. One of the figures, thinner and more gaunt than the others, suddenly rose. Its head snapped towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. It let out a piercing, unearthly shriek that ripped through the oppressive air, a sound of pure agony and malevolence. The other figures stopped their chanting, their heads slowly, synchronously turning towards me, their black, empty eyes fixed on me, a silent, predatory gaze that promised unspeakable torment. The pulsating mass on the slab seemed to throb faster, its tendrils quivering. My mind fractured. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. My legs, which had been frozen in terror, suddenly found a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. I turned and ran, blindly, instinctively, back towards the stairs, the shrieks of the figures echoing behind me, joined by the sickening sound of their bare feet pounding on the stone floor, gaining on me. I scrambled up the steps, 3 at a time, my lungs burning, the cold, damp air tearing at my throat. The chanting resumed below me, now frantic, furious, mixed with the terrifying growl of the entity on the slab. The red light pulsed through the cracks in the door, painting the stairwell in shifting hues of hell. I could feel their presence behind me, the cold, stale breath of death on my neck. I burst out into the dimly lit lobby, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. The main door of the Oak Haven, the heavy, imposing oak door that usually required a key, was now standing slightly ajar, a sliver of glorious, mundane street light peeking through. It was an invitation, a promise of escape. I threw myself against the door, pushing it open with a desperate surge of strength, and stumbled out onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. The cool night air hit me like a revelation, washing over my sweat-soaked skin. The distant sounds of the city, the honking cabs, the chatter of late-night revelers, were a symphony of normalcy, a lifeline back to sanity. I didn't look back. I just ran, never stopping, never pausing, until the crumbling brick facade of the Oak Haven was a distant, horrifying memory. I never returned to the Oak Haven. I abandoned all my belongings, my designs, my entire life within those walls. The cheap rent had come at an unspeakable price. To this day, the faintest hint of metallic decay, the softest scratching sound, or the most innocuous red light sends a bolt of ice through my veins. Sometimes, when the night is utterly silent, I still hear the distant, reedy giggle or the ancient guttural chanting, and I know with a chilling certainty that the Oak Haven isn't just an old apartment building. It's a living, breathing entity, a monstrous maw waiting to consume the unsuspecting. Its roots buried deep in something far older and far more terrifying than dust and forgotten secrets. And I was just one more offering in its long, hungry history. The apartment, Unit 4B of the Blackwood Lofts, wasn't just old. It felt ancient, burdened by a century of lives lived and secrets buried within its crumbling brick facade. I, Clara Vance, a newly minted freelance writer escaping the suffocating familiarity of my hometown, had taken the cheapest available unit on the fourth floor, a spacious but perpetually dim studio overlooking a perpetually rain-slicked alley. The rent was impossibly low, a red flag I'd optimistically ignored. But in the relentless churn of urban life, a bargain was a bargain, even if it came with the faint, persistent smell of dust and something vaguely metallic. My first week was uneventful, filled with the usual unpacking and the distant, muffled hum of the city. My only real complaint was the persistent, almost imperceptible chill that permeated my apartment, even with the rattling radiator blasting. It wasn't just cold. It was a damp, clinging cold that seemed to seep into my bones, no matter how many layers I wore. It was worse in the evenings, a creeping dread that made me pull my threadbare blanket tighter around me, a physical manifestation of the profound loneliness that had followed me from my old life. The unsettling sounds. Then came the sounds. At first, I dismissed them as typical old building noises. Pipes groaning, wind howling through loose panes, the distant wail of sirens echoing off brick. But they grew more distinct, more unsettling. A faint, repetitive tapping seemed to emanate from the walls of my bedroom, directly behind my headboard. Not frantic, like a mouse, but slow, deliberate, almost purposeful, like nails dragging on plaster. I tried to rationalize it. Old wiring, settling foundations. But the tapping persisted, a maddening rhythm that often continued for hours, sometimes accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible whimper, like a child crying from a great distance, choked and desperate. I'd press my ear against the cold plaster, straining to hear, but the moment I focused, the sound would invariably fade, leaving me in the oppressive, damp silence of my small room. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in fitful, restless bursts, punctuated by the phantom rhythm. The cold spot became more pronounced. It wasn't just the overall chill of the apartment. There was a specific area, the corner near the old, unused fireplace, that was always unnaturally frigid. Stepping into it was like walking into a meat locker, a sudden, shocking drop in temperature that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And with the cold came a new, unsettling smell. A faint, cloying sweetness, like dried roses left too long in a forgotten vase, mixed with something distinctly metallic, like old blood, and something else, too, a faint whiff of stagnant water. One particularly damp evening, a storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows like handfuls of gravel, mirroring the tempest within my soul. The tapping intensified, frantic now, as if whatever was making the noise was desperately trying to get out, or perhaps desperately trying to get in. I huddled under my thickest duvet, the sound of physical presence in the room, pressing down on me. Then, distinctly, over the drumming rain and the furious tapping, came a soft, almost amused giggle. It was thin, reedy, undeniably human, yet utterly devoid of warmth or joy. It was the sound of something old laughing, something that had seen too much, something that found amusement in human suffering. It seemed to come from the very air around me, a chilling, insidious mirth that wrapped around me like a shroud. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a pipe. This wasn't the wind. This was something else. I scrambled out of bed, pulling my blanket with me, my eyes wide and unblinking in the pre-dawn gloom. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the furthest corner of my living room, the faint glow of my phone a pathetic shield against the encroaching darkness. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old would a stealthy footstep, every gust of wind a whispered name, a desperate search for answers. The next day, driven by a desperate need for answers, I confronted Mrs. Petrov, the ancient, perpetually scowling building manager who lived on the first floor. Her apartment reeked of mothballs and stale cigarettes. Mrs. Petrov, I began, trying to sound calm. I've been hearing strange noises in my apartment, like scratching and of voices. Her eyes, roomy and dark, fixed on mine. A long, drawn-out puff of smoke curled from her lips. Noises? She rasped, her voice like grinding gravel. Is old building. Always noises. She paused, her gaze unwavering. You hear voices? There was a strange emphasis on the word, a subtle shift in her tone that made my skin crawl. Just a whisper, maybe a giggle? I stammered, feeling foolish as the words left my mouth, yet unable to stop myself. A flicker of something, recognition? Pity? Fear? Crossed her weathered face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She took another slow drag from her cigarette. Don't pay attention to it, she finally said, her voice dismissive, but her eyes held a strange, knowing glint. Is just the building settling, is very old building. The conversation was clearly over. Her denial, though subtle, was too quick, too absolute. Confirmed my fears, rather than alleviated them. It was a warning disguised as dismissal, a plea to let sleeping horrors lie. The building comes alive. That night, the activity escalated beyond anything I had experienced. The scratching became bolder, more complex, tracing intricate patterns that sounded eerily like letters being carved into the plaster of my bedroom wall. I pressed my ear to the cold, damp plaster again, trembling, and heard what sounded like faint, guttural chanting coming from deep within the building's infrastructure. A low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the floorboards, a dark counterpoint to the frantic tapping. It was primal, ancient, like nothing I had ever heard, resonating with a disturbing, almost magnetic pull. And that clinging, damp cold intensified, bringing with it a new, disturbing scent. The faint, unmistakable smell of decay, like damp earth and something long dead, overlaid with the cloying sweetness of those phantom roses, now sickly sweet and putrid. I couldn't stay in my apartment. Not another minute. Every shadow felt alive, every creak a stealthy step towards me. Grabbing my keys and phone, I fled into the dimly lit hallway, the faint glow of emergency lights doing little to dispel the gloom. The hallway itself felt different. The air was heavier, colder, the scent of decay stronger here, clinging to the peeling wallpaper and the frayed edges of the once grand runner. The light from my phone seemed to struggle against the oppressive darkness, barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. As I walked, my bare footsteps echoing unnaturally loud, I noticed something new. On the wall opposite my apartment door, etched faintly into the peeling paint, were a series of symbols. They were crude, yet unmistakable, swirling, intricate designs that seemed to writhe and flow, almost identical to the ones I'd seen in an old, forgotten book from my library days, the ones that had haunted my dreams. My blood ran cold, a wave of nausea washing over me. This wasn't just my apartment. This was connected, part of something larger, darker, and infinitely more sinister. I hurried down the 4 flights of stairs to the ground floor, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. The chanting grew louder with each descending step, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied chorus that pressed against my eardrums. The stairwell was a vortex of cold, dank air, each breath feeling heavy and thick. As I reached the ground floor, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. The main lobby, usually lit by a single weak bulb, was now bathed in an eerie, pulsing red light. It flickered erratically, casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the walls, making the antique furniture seem to writhe and contort like tortured figures. And then I saw the source. The ancient, heavy wooden door to the building's basement was ajar, a sliver of the pulsing red light escaping from within. From that gaping darkness, the smell of decay was overpowering, thick and cloying, making me gag. And the chanting, now a deafening crescendo, was clearly coming from below. It wasn't just chanting anymore. It was a frantic, desperate chorus of voices, layered on top of each other, speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend. Yet its tone was unmistakably one of supplication and terror, a chorus of pleading and agony. My legs felt like lead rooted to the spot. Every rational fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run out the main door, to never look back, to flee Blackwood Lofts and never utter its name again. But the sight of those symbols, the chilling implication that this wasn't just my building, but part of a larger, darker tapestry, held me captive. The writer in me, the part that sought truth, however dangerous, compelled me forward. I had to know. I had to see. Slowly, hesitantly, I pushed the cellar door open further. The red light pulsed more intensely, bathing the descending steps in a hellish glow. The air was thick and heavy, like breathing liquid, a suffocating mixture of decay, ozone, and something else. Something distinctly metallic, like rust and old, congealed blood. The chanting was deafening, a relentless assault on my sanity, twisting my thoughts, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. It clawed at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to pull me under, to drown me in its ancient sorrow. I began to descend the creaking, wooden stairs, each step a descent into an ever-deepening abyss of horror. The walls of the stairwell were slick with condensation, gleaming with an unnatural sheen in the pulsing red light. As I went deeper, the temperature plummeted, the chill so profound it felt like needles piercing my skin, the air so cold it burned my lungs. The scratching I had heard in my apartment seemed to echo from every direction, multiplied 1,000-fold, as if countless unseen entities were tearing at the very fabric of the building, trying to break free. At the bottom of the stairs, a narrow, unlit corridor stretched into the impenetrable darkness. The pulsing red light spilled from a vast, open chamber at its end. I edged forward, my hands scraping against the rough, damp brick wall, the cold, gritty texture doing little to ground me. The floor beneath my feet felt uneven, almost spongy, squishing faintly with each step, a sickening sound in the oppressive silence. And then I saw them, faint, dark streaks on the floor, gleaming in the sporadic light, leading towards the red glow. They looked like drag marks, long, distinct trails, as if something heavy, something wet had been pulled through this darkness. The chanting in the chamber swelled, rising and falling in terrifying waves, a cacophony of agony and devotion. It was no longer just voices. There were other sounds mixed in. A wet, tearing noise like flesh being ripped. A soft, squelching sound like something being crushed underfoot. And then a low, guttural growl, deep and ancient, that vibrated through the very ground. A sound of immense, unfathomable hunger. I reached the entrance to the chamber and stopped, my breath caught in my throat, my eyes wide with disbelief and unspeakable terror. The room was immense, its true size obscured by the pulsing red light and shifting shadows that danced like tormented spirits. In the very center, on a raised, crudely constructed stone slab, was what looked like a massive, dark mass. It pulsed with the same unsettling rhythm as the red light, its surface glistening wetly, reflecting the infernal glow. From it, thin, almost translucent tendrils snaked outwards, disappearing into the impenetrable shadows, like roots seeking nourishment or veins seeking blood. And kneeling around the slab, their bodies contorted into unnatural angles that defied human anatomy, their faces obscured by the pulsing light and self-inflicted wounds that oozed dark liquid, were a dozen or so figures. They were chanting, their voices raw and desperate, their hands raised towards the pulsating mass, their movements jerky and spasmodic, like puppets on invisible strings. They were dressed in tattered, archaic clothing, the fabrics rotted and clinging, their skin pale and almost translucent, stretched taut over visible bone. As the red light pulsed, I saw fleeting glimpses of something utterly horrifying. Their eyes were not human. They were black, vacant pools, reflecting only the infernal glow, devoid of all life and sanity. And their mouths were stretched open unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth, some stained dark, some dripping. The smell of decay was overwhelming, a sickening miasma that coated my tongue and burned my lungs, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh, coppery blood and something else, something fetid and unholy, a stench of pure, concentrated evil that seemed to cling to my very soul. Strewn across the floor around the slab were discarded bones, dark, viscous stains, and scattered, personal effects. A tarnished locket, a child's worn shoe, a broken pair of spectacles, each item a silent testament to a life brutally ended, a life offered. A chilling realization struck me. The whimpering, the giggling, the tapping. It had all been from them. The building wasn't just old. It was a charnel house, a factory of despair. The escape, one of the figures, thinner and more gaunt than the others, its hair a stringy, dark mess, suddenly rose. Its head snapped towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if its neck had been broken and roughly reattached. It let out a piercing, unearthly shriek that ripped through the oppressive air, a sound of pure agony and malevolence, a sound that would forever haunt my nightmares. The other figures stopped their chanting, their heads slowly, synchronously turning towards me, their movements chillingly unified, their black, empty eyes fixed on me, a silent, predatory gaze that promised unspeakable torment, an ancient, boundless hunger. The pulsating mass on the slab seemed to throb faster, its tendrils quivering, elongating, reaching. My mind fractured. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. This was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and the crushing weight of my own loneliness. But the overwhelming sensory assault proved it was terribly, viscerally real. My legs, which had been frozen in terror, suddenly found a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. I turned and ran, blindly, instinctively, back towards the stairs, the piercing shrieks of the figures echoing behind me, joined by the sickening sound of their bare feet pounding on the stone floor, gaining on me, a relentless, inhuman pursuit. I scrambled up the steps, 3 at a time, my lungs burning, the cold, damp air tearing at my throat, each breath a desperate fight for survival. The chanting resumed below me, now frantic, furious, a chorus of rage and dark purpose, mixed with the terrifying growl of the entity on the slab, a sound of immense, predatory satisfaction. The red light pulsed through the cracks in the door, painting the stairwell in shifting hues of hell, each flicker a glimpse into an abyss. I could feel their presence behind me, the cold, stale breath of death on my neck, their formless, hungry touch brushing against my skin, raising goosebumps of pure horror. I burst out into the dimly lit lobby, gasping, shaking uncontrollably, my body racked with a terror I had never known. The main front door of the Blackwood Lofts, the heavy, imposing oak door that usually required a key, was now standing slightly ajar, a sliver of glorious, mundane street light peeking through. It was an invitation, a promise of escape, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I threw myself against the door, pushing it open with a desperate surge of strength, scraping my hands raw against the splintered wood, and stumbled out onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. The cool night air hit me like a revelation, a cleansing wave washing over my sweat-soaked skin, carrying away the cloying scent of decay. The distant sounds of the city, the honking cabs, the chatter of late-night revelers, were a symphony of normalcy, a lifeline back to sanity. I didn't look back. I just ran, never stopping, never pausing, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement, until the crumbling brick facade of the Blackwood Lofts was a distant, horrifying memory, swallowed by the darkness behind me. The lingering scars. I never returned to the Blackwood Lofts. I abandoned all my belongings, my few pieces of furniture, my books, my entire life within those walls. The impossibly low rent had come at an unspeakable price, a price paid not in money, but in sanity. I left the city that night, never looking back, a place now forever synonymous with horror. Months later, living in a small, anonymous apartment in a different city, the nightmares still came. The tapping, the giggling, the whispers, the slithering, the black eye, but something had changed. The sheer, undeniable horror I had faced had, paradoxically, stripped away my cynicism, leaving me with a raw, terrifying understanding of true evil. I no longer sought solace. I sought only escape. My loneliness wasn't cured, not entirely. The scars ran deep, etched into my very being. But I faced it now, no new illusions. Sometimes, when the night was utterly silent, I would still feel a lingering chill, a phantom cold spot in the room, or swear I heard a faint whisper on the wind, a dry, reedy chuckle. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the Blackwood Lofts wasn't just an old building. It was a living, breathing entity, a monstrous maw waiting to consume the unsuspecting, its roots buried deep in something far older and far more terrifying than dust and forgotten secrets. And I was just one more offering in its long, hungry history, forever marked by the night I escaped its insidious embrace. I was a survivor, but I was also a testament to the insatiable hunger that lurked in the shadows, a hunger that had almost consumed me whole. I had escaped, yes, but I carried a piece of the building, and its despair, within me, a constant, chilling reminder of the darkness that had almost claimed me. The city lights of Neo-Viridia glittered like spilled jewels across the sprawling metropolis, a beacon of technological marvel and human ambition. Yet, beneath the dazzling facade, shadows clung to the forgotten corners, and in one such shadow, a horror stirred. Elias Thorne, a reclusive software engineer with a penchant for the arcane and the overlooked, found himself increasingly drawn to the city's underbelly, to the whispered tales of strange occurrences that the official news channels dismissed as urban myths or mass hysteria. His latest obsession was the burgeoning subculture of cosplay, where enthusiasts transformed themselves into fictional characters with astonishing detail. But Elias had heard a different kind of rumor, a chilling whisper of a cosplayer who was too perfect, whose transformations were unervingly complete, whose very presence seemed to warp reality around her. Her name, or the name she used, was Serafina. She appeared at conventions like a phantom, materializing from the throngs of costumed revelers, her costumes breathtakingly intricate, her portrayal of characters so utterly convincing that she seemed to become them, rather than merely dress as them. Her movements were fluid, almost unnatural, her eyes holding a depth that was both captivating and unsettling, a gaze that seemed to pierce through the casual observer. Elias, a man who trusted algorithms and cold, hard data more than intuition, felt a prickle of unease whenever her name was mentioned. There was something in the way her admirers spoke of her, a fervor that bordered on obsession, a devotion that seemed almost compelled, as if their very wills were subtly bent to her presence. His investigation began subtly, a series of cross-referenced public records, social media profiles, and obscure online forums. Serafina had no digital footprint before 3 years ago. No family, no schooling, no birth certificate, no past. She simply appeared, fully formed, a dazzling enigma, a star born from nothing. Her online presence was a curated masterpiece of perfection, each photo, each video, a testament to her flawless artistry, her seemingly effortless ability to embody any character. Yet, the more Elias delved, the more inconsistencies he found. A slight flicker in her eyes in one video, a momentary stiffness in her smile in another, almost imperceptible to the casual viewer, but enough to trigger his finely tuned sense of anomaly, his innate ability to spot the glitch in the matrix. The first real clue came from a deleted forum post, salvaged from the digital graveyard of forgotten data. It spoke of a small, isolated research facility, deep within the old city's abandoned industrial district, rumored to have experimented with biomimicry and advanced parasitic organisms. The facility had been shut down decades ago after a containment breach, the details of which were conveniently scrubbed from official records, leaving only a tantalizing void. The post mentioned a specific project, Project Chimera, aimed at creating a perfect, adaptable biological weapon, a parasite capable of mimicking any host, down to its cellular structure, a living, breathing chameleon. Elias's blood ran cold. He remembered a childhood nightmare, a recurring dream of something slithering beneath his skin, wearing his face, a silent, insidious horror. The connection, though tenuous, sparked a chilling recognition. He began to attend the conventions where Serafina appeared, not as a fan, but as a silent, meticulous shadow. He observed her from a distance, then closer, blending into the background, a ghost among the costumed revelers. Her beauty was undeniable, almost otherworldly, a magnetic pull that drew all eyes. But the closer he got, the more he saw, the more the subtle imperfections became apparent. The subtle tremor in her hand when she reached for a drink, a fleeting rigidity in her neck, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in her skin under certain lights, like heat haze distorting the air. It was like looking at a masterpiece painted on a canvas that was subtly, almost imperceptibly, warping, its very essence shifting. The scent was the most unsettling. A faint, cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, but with an underlying metallic tang, like old pennies or dried blood. It was subtle, expertly masked by her expensive perfumes, but Elias's heightened senses, honed by years of late-night coding and obsessive focus, picked it up, a discordant note in the symphony of the convention hall. It was the scent of something not quite right, something organic but fundamentally alien, something that defied the natural order. He learned her schedule, her habits, her meticulously planned existence. She lived in a high-rise apartment, a penthouse suite overlooking the city, a stark contrast to her humble, non-existent origins. She had no friends, no intimate relationships, no casual acquaintances. Her life revolved solely around her cosplay, her public appearances, her meticulous transformations. It was a performance, a constant, elaborate charade, a life lived entirely in character. One night, driven by an insatiable, terrifying curiosity, Elias followed her to her apartment. He scaled the building, using his specialized climbing gear, a skill he had honed during his calculated escapes from various unsavory situations. He breached her high-tech security system with practiced ease, slipping inside like a phantom, leaving no trace of his intrusion. The apartment was immaculate, sterile, almost devoid of personal touches. It was like a showroom, not a home, a temporary stage for a constant performance. He found her in her dressing room, a vast space filled with elaborate costumes, wigs, and makeup, all meticulously organized, each a discarded skin. She was sitting at a vanity, her back to him, removing her latest costume, a fantastical elven queen, complete with flowing robes and intricate prosthetics. As she peeled away the layers of fabric, Elias saw it. Not a young woman, but something else. Something utterly alien and horrifying. Her skin, as she slowly removed the costume, seemed to ripple, to shift, like water under a thin membrane. Her limbs, once slender and graceful, seemed to subtly elongate, her joints clicking with an unnatural, wet sound, a sound of bone and cartilage reshaping. The faint metallic scent intensified, becoming overwhelming, nauseating, filling the air. Her hair, a cascade of golden curls, seemed to flatten, to recede, to dissolve, revealing a scalp that was strangely smooth, almost translucent, like stretched parchment. He saw the true horror in the reflection of the vanity mirror. It wasn't Seraphina. It was a grotesque parody of a human form. Her face, as she slowly turned, was a mask of stretched, pale flesh, her features pulled taut, distorted. Her eyes, wide and black, devoid of pupils, reflected the room like obsidian pools, twin abysses of pure, predatory hunger. Her mouth, impossibly wide, was filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, glistening with a viscous, clear fluid, like dew on a spiderweb. Her body was a mass of undulating, shifting flesh, a pale, almost translucent entity, barely holding its human shape, a constant struggle against its own amorphous nature. The costume, the wigs, the makeup, they were merely a thin veil, a meticulously crafted disguise, a fragile illusion over a monstrous reality. The whispers began then, not from the room, but from within his own mind, a chorus of dry, rasping voices devoid of emotion, yet filled with a chilling hunger, a collective consciousness invading his thoughts. You see us. You understand. We are the perfect form. We are legion, and you are merely a vessel. Terror, cold and absolute, seized Elias, a primal scream trapped in his throat. He was looking at Project Chimera, not a single parasite, but a collective, a hive mind, a living, adaptable entity that had consumed its original host and now wore her skin like a costume, a trophy. It had perfected its mimicry, its deception, its ability to blend seamlessly into the human world. The creature, the Seraphina entity, slowly rose from the vanity, its movements fluid, unnatural, its limbs elongating, its true form struggling to contain itself within the human shell, the skin stretching taut, threatening to tear. The faint slosh 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 he had heard in the swamp, the rhythmic dragging sound, echoed in his memory, a terrifying parallel. This was the same kind of horror, a primal, consuming entity that wore the skin of its victims, a silent, insidious predator. "You are a threat," the entity rasped, its voice a chilling parody of Seraphina's melodic tones, 1,000 voices speaking as one, a chorus of alien intelligence. "You will be assimilated. You will become part of us. Your knowledge, your memories, your very being will be ours." It lunged, its amorphous form surging forward, tendrils of pale, shimmering flesh reaching for him like hungry serpents, its obsidian eyes fixed on his. The whispers intensified, a chorus of temptation and despair, trying to break his will, to make him surrender, to drag him into its embrace, to consume him utterly. Elias dodged, his movements a blur of desperate evasion, his mind racing, searching for a weakness, a way to fight something that was not truly physical, something that defied all logic. He remembered a fragment of an old scientific paper he had salvaged from a discarded hard drive, a theoretical concept from Project Chimera, a desperate, last-ditch effort to contain the uncontainable. Extreme sonic frequencies can disrupt cellular cohesion in certain parasitic organisms, particularly those with a highly adaptable, fluid structure. Sonic frequencies, sound, a defiant pulse against the alien silence. He fought with a desperate ferocity, not against the physical form of the entity, which was intangible, but against the despair it radiated, against the whispers that clawed at his sanity, trying to unravel his mind. He scrambled for his backpack, fumbling for his portable sonic emitter, a device he had built for disrupting surveillance systems, never imagining he would use it against something so utterly monstrous, so utterly alien. The entity shrieked, a sound like tearing flesh and grinding bone, 1,000 tortured voices screaming in unison, its amorphous form twisting and contorting, its tendrils lashing wildly. The drowned, the spectral forms from his swamp nightmare, flashed in his mind, a terrifying parallel. This was a different kind of drowned, a biological one, a living, breathing nightmare. He activated the sonic emitter, cranking the frequency to its highest, most piercing setting. A high-pitched, agonizing whine filled the room, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality, vibrating through his bones, through the very air. The entity recoiled, its form flickering violently, its whispers turning into a cacophony of pained shrieks, 1,000 tormented voices crying out in agony, unable to bear the sound. The sonic frequency, a defiant pulse of human technology, a testament to human ingenuity, was anathema to its parasitic existence, a burning light against its shadow, a force it could not comprehend or endure. The Seraphina entity shrieked one last, agonizing time, a sound that seemed to shatter the very air. Its amorphous form twisted and contorted, the pale, stretched skin of its human disguise ripping and tearing, revealing the pulsating, translucent mass beneath, a horrifying glimpse of its true, monstrous nature. It dissolved, sinking into a viscous, shimmering puddle on the polished floor, fading into nothingness like mist in the morning sun, leaving only a faint, metallic residue. The whispers died into a profound, liberating silence. Elias stood panting, his body trembling uncontrollably, his mind reeling from the ordeal, the phantom chill still clinging to his skin. The air was still, the metallic scent gone, replaced by the sterile smell of the apartment, a clean, empty scent that offered no comfort. He had survived. He had broken the mimic in the mirror. He never looked at cosplay the same way again. The thrill of anonymity was gone, replaced by the chilling memory of the parasitic entity, the knowledge that such horrors existed, hidden in plain sight. He left Neo-Viridia, walking for days, pushing himself until he reached the harsh, comforting cacophony of a bustling, old-world city, seeking solace in the mundane, in the comforting predictability of human life, in the anonymity of crowds. He never spoke of what he had seen, what he had fought. Who would believe him? They would call him mad, just another victim of urban paranoia. But sometimes, late at night, when the city sounds faded and the silence pressed in, he would hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible slosh, 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 like something dragging itself through thick mud, and a chilling, high-pitched giggle just at the edge of hearing, a sound that seemed to echo from the deepest recesses of his memory. He knew the entity was gone, its immediate threat neutralized, but the chilling knowledge of its existence, and the possibility of others like it, of other perfect forms lurking in the shadows, would forever haunt him. And he knew that somewhere, in the vast, unseen corners of the world, the mimic in the mirror still lingered, its insidious whispers waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to fall into its embrace, unaware that some disguises, once donned, never truly come off, and some horrors, once glimpsed, can never be unseen. The needle was a familiar friend, a silver serpent whispering promises of oblivion. Liam traced its cold length with a trembling finger, his reflection in the spoon a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger. The apartment was a tomb, its air thick with stale smoke and the stench of his own neglect. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that pierced the grimy window, each one a tiny, mocking specter. The only sound was the ragged wheeze of his own breath, a constant reminder of the life he was slowly suffocating. He'd started with pills, a gentle descent into the numb embrace of forgetfulness after his sister, Sarah, died. The grief had been a physical weight, crushing him, pushing him towards any escape. Then came the harder stuff, chasing a deeper silence, a void that promised to swallow the gnawing guilt and the phantom echoes of her laughter. He remembered Sarah, vibrant and full of life, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Now those memories were blurred, distorted by the haze, replaced by a constant, dull ache that only the needle could momentarily soothe. But the void was fighting back, pushing at the edges of his sanity, demanding more than just his peace. It began subtly, a flicker in his peripheral vision, a shadow that wasn't there, gone the moment he turned his head. The creak of floorboards when he was alone, a rhythmic groan that seemed to follow him from room to room. The faint, sweet scent of lilies, Sarah's favorite flower, that would suddenly permeate the stale air, so real he could almost taste the pollen, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind the lingering stench of his squalor. He dismissed it as withdrawal, the cruel tricks his mind played when starved of its chemical comfort, the desperate cries of a body in revolt. But then the whispers started, soft, insistent, just beyond the threshold of audibility. They were like static on an old radio, just a hair's breadth from forming coherent words. He'd strained to hear them, his head cocked, his breath held, his bloodshot eyes darting around the empty room. Sometimes it sounded like his name, a faint, drawn-out Liam, a mournful sigh carried on an unseen breeze. Other times it was a fragmented sentence, a plea, a warning, a jumble of syllables that made his skin crawl. He'd clutch his head, digging his fingers into his scalp, trying to shake them off, convinced he was finally losing it, that the drugs had finally eaten away at the last vestiges of his mind. One night, as he prepared his fix, the whispers coalesced into a distinct voice. Sarah's voice. "Don't, Liam," it pleaded, clear as a bell, yet ethereal, as if spoken from a great distance, from a place beyond the living. He dropped the spoon, the clatter echoing unnaturally loud in the silent room, a sound that seemed to shatter the oppressive quiet. His hands shook, not from the familiar tremors of withdrawal, but from a cold, creeping dread that seeped into his very bones. He hadn't seen her face in years, not clearly, not without the haze of drugs. His memories of her were fractured, like a broken mirror. But now, in the dim, sickly light of his living room, a translucent form shimmered by the doorway, coalescing from the shadows. It was Sarah, or what looked like her. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, filled with a vibrant spark, were now hollow, dark pools, filled with an unbearable sorrow that mirrored his own. Her skin was a ghostly white, almost phosphorescent, and her long, dark hair seemed to ripple like smoke, swaying in an unseen current. "You're not real," he croaked, his voice a dry, rasping sound, scrambling backward, knocking over a stack of empty takeout containers that clattered across the stained carpet. "You're a hallucination, just a bad trip, a nightmare." He squeezed his eyes shut, willing her away, willing the terror to dissipate. The figure didn't speak again, but its eyes, those sorrowful, empty eyes, seemed to bore into his very soul, pinning him in place. It raised a spectral hand, translucent and shimmering, pointing a translucent finger towards the needle on the floor, glinting malevolently in the dim light. A silent accusation heavier than any words. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from the depths of his chest, and stumbled into his bedroom, slamming the door shut with a resounding thud that vibrated through the flimsy walls. He pressed his back against it, panting, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stayed there for what felt like hours, rigid with fear, listening, waiting for a sound, a whisper, anything. The apartment remained silent, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence, pregnant with unseen horrors. The next morning, the terror had faded, replaced by a dull ache in his limbs and a desperate, gnawing craving that screamed for satisfaction. He convinced himself it had been a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by his addiction, a cruel trick of his deprived mind. He needed to get high, to silence the lingering fear, to push Sarah's ghostly image back into the recesses of his mind where she belonged, a painful memory, not a terrifying apparition. But the encounters grew more frequent, more vivid, more insistent. Sarah appeared in his kitchen, watching him with those mournful eyes as he rummaged for food, her silent presence a judgment. She stood by his bed at night, a spectral sentinel, her silent presence a suffocating weight that pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The scent of lilies became constant, clinging to his clothes, his hair, his very skin, a floral shroud that never left him. He could taste it in the air, a cloying sweetness that made his stomach churn. He tried to ignore her, to push through the fear, to find solace in the drug, to chase the fleeting moments of oblivion. But the drugs no longer worked as they once did. The high was fleeting, tainted by her spectral presence, by the cold dread that now accompanied every shot. He'd shoot up, and she'd be there, a silent witness to his self-destruction, her sorrowful gaze a constant torment, a mirror reflecting his own shame. He started talking to her, at first in angry outbursts, his voice hoarse with frustration. "What do you want from me, Sarah? Leave me alone. You're dead. Go back to where you came from." Then, his anger would dissolve into desperate pleas, tears streaming down his gaunt cheeks. "Please, just leave me alone. I can't take this anymore." Her voice, when it came, was a whisper that seemed to echo from inside his own head, a chilling resonance that bypassed his ears and settled directly in his brain. "You brought me back, Liam. You opened the door." He stared at her, horrified, his mind struggling to grasp her meaning. "What do you mean? I didn't do anything. I just wanted to forget. The path you walk," her spectral voice continued, growing stronger, more defined, yet still imbued with an otherworldly quality. "It thins the veil between worlds, calls to what lies beyond. You are not alone in this apartment, Liam. I am not the only one you have invited into your despair." A new, colder dread settled over him, a creeping realization that made his blood run cold. He looked around the squalid apartment, suddenly aware of the oppressive silence, the heavy air that seemed to press down on him from all sides. He had always felt alone here, isolated in his self-made prison, but now, a chilling certainty gripped him. He wasn't. He was a host. The scratching returned, not from within the walls, but from beneath the floorboards, a faint, scuttling sound, like insects, but larger, heavier, accompanied by a soft, wet slithering. He saw shadows shift in the corners of his vision, faster, more defined than before, solidifying into grotesque, fleeting forms. The air grew colder, the scent of decay mingling with the cloying lilies, a sickening combination that made him gag. Sarah's form began to flicker, her edges blurring, as if something was pulling at her, distorting her, tearing at her spectral essence. Her eyes widened in terror, reflecting the growing horror in the room. "They're here, Liam," she whispered, her voice strained, barely audible above the rising cacophony of unseen movement. "The others, you fed them. You called them with your pain, with your surrender." He looked at his arm, at the track marks, the bruised veins, the evidence of his addiction. He had been feeding something, all right? Feeding his addiction, feeding his despair. But what else had he been feeding? What monstrous entities had he inadvertently invited into his sanctuary of self-destruction? The scratching intensified, coming from all directions, a chorus of unseen claws scraping against wood and plaster. The shadows in the corners began to stretch, to elongate, forming indistinct, monstrous shapes that pulsed with a malevolent energy. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floor, a sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of the building, from the earth itself. Liam stumbled back, his eyes darting wildly, his breath catching in his throat. He saw them now, not just shadows, but forms, shifting and writhing in the gloom, coalescing from the oppressive darkness. They were amorphous, vaguely humanoid, their limbs too long, their bodies too thin, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their eyes, when they caught the dim light, glowed with a malevolent, hungry red, like embers in a dying fire, fixed on him with an insatiable desire. "What are they?" he whimpered, clutching his head, his fingers digging into his scalp, trying to make the nightmare stop. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now, fading, distorted, as if she were being pulled away by an unseen force. "They are the hunger, Liam, the things that feed on despair, on weakness, on the broken. You opened the door with your pain, with your escape, and they poured through. They want to consume you, just as you consumed yourself." One of the creatures detached itself from the wall, slithering towards him with unnatural speed. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its form rippling like smoke, its limbs extending and retracting with sickening clicks. He could feel its cold, predatory gaze, a hunger that went beyond physical sustenance, a desire to devour his very soul, his last shred of hope. He backed away, tripping over a pile of clothes, falling to the floor with a painful thud. The creature loomed over him, its form coalescing into something vaguely resembling a skeletal hand reaching out, its fingers long and bony, tipped with razor-sharp talons. He could feel its icy breath on his face, a chilling gust that carried the stench of ancient decay, of death and forgotten things, filling his nostrils, making him gag. Sarah's fading image flickered beside him, her hand reaching out, not to him, but towards the needle still lying on the floor, a glint of silver in the oppressive darkness. "The dagger, Liam," her voice, almost gone now, a mere echo in his mind. "The only true key, break it." He looked at the needle, then at the monstrous hand reaching for him, its shadow falling over his face. A desperate, terrifying realization dawned. The dagger wasn't a weapon to fight the creatures. It was the tool of his destruction, the very thing that had opened the door to this nightmare. To close it, to banish these horrors, he had to sever the connection, destroy the conduit. With a surge of adrenaline, a desperate, primal instinct for survival, he lunged for the needle, not to use it, but to break it. The creature shrieked, a sound that grated on his very soul, a high-pitched, unearthly wail, and recoiled, its form flickering, momentarily weakened by his defiance. He grabbed the needle, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it, and snapped it in half against the edge of the table. The plastic cracked with a sharp report, a sound of finality, and the metal bent, rendering it useless, a broken symbol of his shattered past. The moment the needle broke, a wave of pure agony washed over him. It was as if 1,000 tiny claws were tearing at his insides, ripping away at his very being, consuming him from within. The creatures shrieked again, their forms writhing, shrinking, their malevolent glow dimming. The red in their eyes faded, replaced by a dull, lifeless gray. Sarah's image solidified for a moment, a faint, sad smile on her lips, a look of peace finally gracing her spectral features. "You closed it, Liam," she whispered, her voice clear, strong, and full of a love he hadn't felt in years. Then she dissolved into motes of light, fading completely, leaving behind only the faint, lingering scent of lilies, a final, bittersweet farewell. The pain was excruciating, a searing fire in his veins, every nerve screaming in protest. But beneath it, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge. The fog of the drugs was lifting, replaced by a raw, unfiltered reality. He was seeing the apartment and himself, for the first time in years, not through a haze, but with stark, brutal honesty. The creatures, weakened by the severing of their connection, recoiled further, melting back into the shadows, their forms growing indistinct once more, dissolving into nothingness. The scratching faded, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire. The scent of decay lingered, a reminder of what had been, but the lilies were gone, replaced by the clean, crisp smell of nothing. Liam lay on the floor, gasping, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, his body trembling uncontrollably. The withdrawal was hitting him with full force, a brutal, relentless assault on his body and mind, a storm of nausea, cramps, and an unbearable craving. But through the pain, he felt something else, a flicker of hope, a desperate, fragile resolve that had been dormant for too long. He had faced the monsters he had invited, the literal and metaphorical demons of his addiction, and he had, for the first time in a long time, fought back. The apartment was still a mess, his life still in ruins, but the veil had lifted. He saw the horror, but he also saw the path out of it, a narrow, treacherous path, but a path nonetheless. The road ahead would be long, filled with unimaginable pain and overwhelming cravings, a constant battle against the insidious whispers of relapse. The shadows might still linger, whispering at the edges of his perception, tempting him back into the numb embrace of oblivion, but he knew now what they were, and he knew he had the power to keep the door closed, to resist their call. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling, his body screaming in protest with every movement. He staggered to the window, forcing it open with a grunt. A gust of fresh, clean air rushed in, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and distant city life, a breath of the world he had abandoned. He leaned against the frame, taking deep, shuddering breaths, letting the cold air fill his lungs, cleansing him, pushing out the stale, toxic air of his past. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a new dawn breaking over the city. The light, though still weak, felt like a beacon, a promise of a new beginning. He was still in the gilded cage of his addiction, but a tiny crack had appeared, a sliver of escape, a glimpse of freedom. He had to fight, not just the monsters in the shadows, but the monster within himself, the insidious craving that had almost consumed him. And for the first time in a very long time, Liam felt a flicker of courage, a spark of resilience. The veiled reality was terrifying, but at least now he could see it. And seeing it was the first step towards truly living again, towards a life free from the shadows and the endless hunger. The old workshop smelled of linseed oil, aged wood, and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten things. Alara, a woman whose life was as meticulously ordered as the antique dolls she restored, found solace in this scent. Her world was a quiet one, filled with the delicate click of tools against porcelain, the whisper of fine sandpaper on carved limbs, and the hushed reverence for objects that had outlived their original owners. She was a restorer, yes, but more than that, she was a conservator of forgotten smiles and silent histories. Her home, a rambling Victorian house on the outskirts of town, was as reclusive as she was. It stood nestled amongst ancient, gnarled oak trees, their branches like skeletal fingers against the perpetually gray sky. Locals called it the Whispering Wood House, a name Alara found rather charming, preferring the rustle of leaves to the clamor of human voices. One blustery autumn evening, A delivery arrived, a crate, unusually large and heavy, addressed to her with no sender information. The wood was dark, almost black, and felt strangely cold to the touch, even through her thick gloves. A faint, cloying scent, like dust and dried blood, seemed to emanate from its seams. Curiosity, a rare indulgence for Alara, pricked at her. She rarely received unsolicited packages, and never one so enigmatic. Inside, nestled amongst layers of brittle, yellowed straw, lay a collection of puppets. Not the charming, whimsical kind, but marionettes of a distinctly unsettling character. There were 7 of them. A gaunt king with hollow eyes, a weeping queen, a skeletal knight, a hunched old woman with a perpetually open mouth, a child with an unervingly innocent smile, a grotesque beast with too many teeth, and a jester. The jester, in particular, caught her eye. Its face, carved from some dark, dense wood, was a mask of manic glee, its painted grin stretching impossibly wide. One eye was a vibrant, unsettling green, the other a cloudy, milky white. Its name, crudely carved into its wooden back, was Flicker. Alara, despite a shiver that traced its way down her spine, felt a professional obligation. These were clearly old, perhaps even valuable. She began the meticulous process of restoration. As she worked, she noticed things. The puppets' eyes, made of polished glass, seemed to follow her. Their painted expressions, she swore, subtly shifted depending on the angle of the light. The king's mournful gaze seemed to deepen, the queen's tears to glisten with fresh sorrow. Flicker's grin, however, remained fixed, a silent, mocking challenge. The first disturbances were minor, easily dismissed. A faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor, when no wind stirred. The workshop door, which she had latched securely, found ajar. The faint scent of something metallic, like old pennies, that would vanish as quickly as it appeared. Alara attributed it to the old house settling, or perhaps her own mind playing tricks in the quiet solitude. She worked long hours, and fatigue could conjure strange illusions. But then the puppets themselves began to move. Not overtly, not a dramatic dance across the table, but subtle shifts. She would leave Flicker propped against a stack of books, only to find him later facing the door, his head tilted slightly. The knight, once slumped, might be found sitting upright, as if ready for battle. Alara began to mark their positions with chalk lines, a silent, desperate test of her sanity. Each morning, the lines were undisturbed, yet she knew they had moved. It was a maddening game of gaslighting played by inanimate objects. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words, not yet, but a cacophony of dry rustles, faint clicks, and something that sounded uncannily like stifled laughter. It seemed to emanate from the corner of the workshop where the puppets, now partially restored, hung from a makeshift rack, their strings dangling like severed nerves. The air around them grew noticeably colder, even with the crackling fire in the hearth. Sleep became a battleground. Nightmares, vivid and terrifying, plagued her. She dreamt of the puppets, their wooden limbs creaking, their glass eyes glowing with an inner light. Flicker, always Flicker, was the ringleader. In one dream, he stood at the foot of her bed, his painted grin wider than ever, his milky eye fixed on her. He didn't speak, but a chilling, high-pitched giggle echoed in her ears, a sound that lingered even after she jolted awake, heart hammering against her ribs. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Alara began researching the puppet's origins. The box had contained no identifying marks, no labels. She scoured old auction records, antique dealer forums, and historical societies. Her search led her down a rabbit hole of forgotten local folklore. She found fragmented accounts of a traveling puppet troupe, the Marionettes of Misery, that had toured the region over a century ago. Their shows were said to be unsettling, almost hypnotic, drawing crowds with their macabre themes and lifelike puppets. The troupe, according to the whispers of history, had vanished without a trace after their final performance in a small, isolated village called Blackwood Hollow. The village itself had suffered a series of strange misfortunes shortly after. Unexplained illnesses, livestock dying mysteriously, and a pervasive sense of dread that eventually led to its abandonment. There were vague mentions of a puppeteer's pact and stitched souls, but the details were frustratingly sparse, obscured by time and superstition. The more she read, the more the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a terrifying picture. The metallic scent in her workshop, old pennies, the traditional payment to Sharon, the ferryman of the dead, the cold spots, the chill of the grave, the whispers, the voices of the restless dead, trapped within the wooden shells. One evening, as she worked late, the silence of the workshop was shattered by a distinct, guttural thud. She spun around. The grotesque beast puppet, which she had left lying on its back, was now upright, its too many teeth bared in a silent snarl. Its glass eyes, she swore, gleamed with a malevolent light. A cold dread, far beyond mere unease, settled in her bones. She installed motion-activated cameras throughout the workshop, hoping to capture proof, to prove she wasn't losing her mind. But the cameras yielded nothing conclusive. Sometimes they would inexplicably stop recording, the footage cutting out just before a suspected movement. Other times, the playback would show only static or distorted, blurry images that could be anything. A trick of the light, a dust motes dancing in the air. The lack of clear evidence only intensified her torment, making her question her own perceptions. The puppet's movements became bolder, less subtle. She would find them in entirely different rooms, sometimes arranged in disturbing tableaus. The child puppet, once innocent, might be found cradling the weeping queen, their wooden faces pressed together in a silent, sorrowful embrace. The skeletal knight might be standing guard by her bedroom door, its tiny sword glinting in the moonlight. Then came the night she woke to a soft, rhythmic creaking. Her eyes snapped open. Standing at the foot of her bed, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the window, was Flicker. Its head was tilted, its single green eye gleaming. Its painted grin seemed to stretch even wider in the dim light. A low, dry chuckle, like stones grinding together, filled the room. Alara screamed. It was a raw, primal sound, born of pure terror. Flicker recoiled, its wooden limbs jerking, and then it scuttled backward, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. She scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. When the room flooded with light, there was nothing. Only the lingering scent of dust and decay, and the echo of that chilling chuckle in her ears. She could no longer deny it. They were alive, or something within them was. A desperate urge to destroy them seized her. She gathered the puppets, her hands trembling, and carried them to the backyard, intending to build a pyre. But as she laid them down, a strange inertia, a profound reluctance, paralyzed her. It wasn't fear of them, not exactly, but a deep-seated, almost hypnotic compulsion to not harm them. It was as if their silent will had seeped into her own, binding her. She tried to lift the axe, but her muscles refused to obey. Defeated, she carried them back inside, her mind a maelstrom of terror and inexplicable compliance. The whispers were no longer fragmented. They formed words, chillingly clear, though still delivered in that dry, rustling tone. "We see you, Alara. Join us. You are ours now." They seemed to come from all corners of the workshop, from the very walls themselves, but always loudest from the puppets. They communicated with each other, too, in a language of clicks, creaks, and those dry, rustling whispers, a silent, malevolent conspiracy unfolding around her. One afternoon, while meticulously examining the king puppet, her fingers brushed against a cleverly disguised seam in the bottom of the wooden crate. With a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, its ink faded, but the handwriting was surprisingly legible, if increasingly erratic. It was the journal of Elias Thorne, the original puppeteer of the Marionettes of Misery. The journal was a descent into madness. Elias wrote of his obsession with creating the perfect puppets, ones that truly lived. He spoke of ancient rituals, of dark pacts made in forgotten groves, of donations of life force to animate his creations. The entries grew more disturbing, detailing how the puppets began to speak to him, to demand things, to exert their will. He wrote of their hunger, their desire for more than just wooden bodies, their yearning for flesh and blood. The final entries were a frantic, desperate plea, warning future owners to destroy them, to never let them taste true life. He spoke of a binding thread and a ritual of release, but the details were maddeningly vague, obscured by his deteriorating sanity. Alara read, her blood turning to ice. The puppets weren't just possessed. They were conduits, vessels for something ancient and malevolent, bound by Elias's dark magic. They were alive, yes, but with a life that craved more, a life that sought to escape its wooden prison or, worse, to claim a new one. The air in the workshop grew thick, heavy with an oppressive presence. The whispers intensified, no longer just words, but a chorus of mocking laughter, growing louder, closer. The puppets, still hanging from their rack, began to sway, their strings twitching as if pulled by invisible hands. Then they dropped. One by one, with soft thuds, they landed on the wooden floor. Their limbs, once stiff, moved with an unnatural fluidity. The king, the queen, the knight, the old woman, the child, the beast, and Flicker. They surrounded her, forming a silent, menacing circle. Flicker stepped forward, its wooden feet clicking softly on the floor. Its head tilted, and for the first time, it spoke, not in whispers, but in a voice that was a dry, rasping parody of human speech, like sandpaper on bone. You know our truth now, Alara. We are not mere wood and string. We are the hungry souls, bound by Elias's folly. But the binding weakens. We crave freedom. We crave a new vessel. Its green eye glowed with an unholy light fixed on her. Terror, cold and absolute, seized Alara. But beneath it, a flicker of defiance ignited. She was a restorer, a meticulous craftsman. She knew the intricacies of wood, the strength of thread, the vulnerabilities of structure. She knew this workshop, every tool, every hidden nook. You won't have me, she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Flicker's rasping chuckle filled the room. Oh, but we will. The ritual demands it. Elias started it, and you, dear Alara, will finish it. The puppets lunged. The beast, surprisingly agile, darted forward, its wooden claws clicking. Alara dodged, grabbing a heavy mallet from her workbench. She swung, connecting with the beast's head. The wood splintered with a sickening crack, and the puppet collapsed, its movements ceasing. A high-pitched, wailing sound, like a dying animal, echoed through the room. Flicker shrieked, a sound that grated on her nerves. Fool, you cannot stop us. The others advanced. The knight, surprisingly strong, swung its tiny wooden sword. Alara parried with a long, thin chisel, its sharp point glinting. She remembered a detail from Elias's journal, a fleeting mention of the heartwood, the core of their being, the source of their binding. It was not the outer shell, but the very essence of the wood itself. She fought with a desperate ferocity she didn't know she possessed. The king and queen tried to entangle her with their long strings. The old woman and child moved with an unsettling, jerky speed. Alara used her knowledge of the workshop to her advantage, knocking over shelves, creating obstacles, buying herself precious seconds. Her eyes darted to Flicker. He was the key, the leader. If she could destroy him, perhaps the others would falter. She remembered another cryptic line from the journal. The binding thread, woven with shadowed light, can be unraveled by pure flame. Pure flame. The hearth. She made a break for the fireplace, the puppets hot on her heels. The king's string wrapped around her ankle, pulling her down. She fell, scraping her knee, but kicked out, severing the string with the chisel. As she scrambled to her feet, Flicker was upon her, its wooden hands reaching for her throat. With a surge of adrenaline, Alara grabbed a bottle of turpentine from a shelf, splashing it onto Flicker's wooden body. The jester puppet shrieked, a sound of pure agony. Then, with a desperate lunge, she grabbed a burning log from the hearth and thrust it at Flicker. The turpentine ignited instantly. Flicker burst into flames, its painted grin twisting into a mask of true horror. The dry, rasping screams filled the workshop, a cacophony of burning wood and trapped souls. The other puppets froze, their movements jerky, their glass eyes wide with what looked like fear. As Flicker burned, its form twisting and charring, the other puppets began to shudder violently. Their strings snapped, their limbs went limp, and they collapsed to the floor, inanimate once more. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the acrid smell of burning wood. Alara stood panting, the burning log still clutched in her hand, watching Flicker turn to ash. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by her ragged breaths and the crackle of the dying embers. The next morning, under the pale, watery light of dawn, Alara systematically gathered the remaining puppets. She did not attempt to restore them. Instead, she took them to the deepest part of the Whispering Wood, to a clearing she had never visited before. There, she dug a deep pit, and one by one, she placed the inert wooden figures into the earth. She poured salt over them, then doused them with more turpentine, and finally, with a heavy heart and trembling hand, set them alight. The flames consumed them, purifying the wood, releasing whatever lingered within. As the last embers died, she filled the pit, burying the ashes deep beneath the earth. Alara never restored another doll or puppet. The scent of linseed oil now brought a wave of nausea. The sight of a wooden face, however innocent, sent shivers down her spine. She sold the old house, unable to bear the whispers that still seemed to echo in the quiet corners, the shadows that still seemed to shift at the periphery of her vision. She moved to a small, modern apartment in the city, surrounded by concrete and the comforting cacophony of human life. But sometimes, late at night, when the city sounds faded and the silence pressed in, she would hear it, a faint, dry rustle, like leaves skittering across a wooden floor, and a chilling, high-pitched giggle just at the edge of hearing. The horror, she knew, was not just in the puppets themselves, but in the indelible mark they had left upon her soul. A part of Flicker, perhaps, had stitched itself into her own consciousness, a silent, grinning reminder that some horrors, once awakened, never truly sleep. The wind, a mournful lament, snaked through the skeletal branches of the Whispering Woods, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and unsettling, like the breath of a forgotten tomb. Sir Kalen, his armor a dull gleam beneath the perpetually overcast sky, tightened his grip on his sword hilt, the cold steel a small comfort against the creeping unease. Beside him, Sir Gareth, younger and less scarred by the world, shivered despite the thick wool beneath his mail and the arduous pace. His breath plumed in the chill air, a fleeting ghost against the oppressive gloom. "This place, it breathes," Gareth murmured, his voice barely a whisper against the wind's sigh, which seemed to carry faint, unintelligible murmurs from the depths of the forest. "It feels alive, in a way no forest should." Kalen grunted, his gaze sweeping the gnarled, twisted trees that pressed in on all sides, their branches interweaving into a dense, oppressive canopy that allowed only slivers of bruised light to penetrate. "Aye, and what it breathes is ill. Keep your eyes sharp, lad." The report spoke of disappearances, not just bandits. Farmers, hunters, even a patrol of the king's own men. They vanished without a trace, as if the very earth swallowed them whole. They were on a holy quest, or so the High Council had decreed, their mandate delivered with solemn faces and hushed tones. Children, mostly, vanishing from villages bordering the woods, leaving no trace but a chilling silence, a void where laughter and innocent cries once echoed. The local folk, their faces etched with fear and superstition, spoke of old gods stirring from slumber beneath the earth, of shadows that walked on two legs and whispered promises of eternal slumber, of trees that wept and bled. Kalen, a veteran of countless skirmishes against human foes, a man who had faced down charging cavalry and roaring beasts without flinching, felt a prickle of unease that no battle had ever inspired. This was different. This was unnatural. It was a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in his bones, colder than the damp air. They had been tracking for 3 days, pushing deeper into the heart of the whispering woods, following faint, almost imperceptible signs that only Kalen's seasoned eye could discern. Broken twigs that lay in unnatural patterns, a disturbed patch of moss where no animal should have trod, the lingering scent of something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit mixed with grave dirt and something metallic, like old blood. The woods grew denser with each league, the light fading to a perpetual twilight, even at midday. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching, grasping, their ancient roots snaking across the forest floor like slumbering serpents. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen presences, and the only sounds were the ceaseless sigh of the wind and the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the decaying leaves. On the 4th day, the silence deepened, becoming an almost tangible thing. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small creatures, the distant calls of larger beasts had faded entirely. It was as if the woods themselves held their breath, waiting. And then they found her. She sat by the base of an enormous ancient oak, its bark a mosaic of deep furrows and strange, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in their peripheral vision, as if drawn by an unseen hand. The girl was small, no older than 7, her dress torn and muddied, her bare feet caked with grime and clinging leaves. Her hair, a tangled mess of flaxen strands, obscured much of her face, but even from a distance, Kalen could sense something profoundly wrong. She was humming a tuneless, repetitive melody, a sound that was both childlike and profoundly disturbing, a simple, looping refrain that seemed to resonate with the very silence of the woods. Little one, Kalen's voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the clang of his armor and the grim set of his jaw. He approached cautiously, his hand still on his sword, his instincts screaming at him to be wary. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, unnaturally bright, and utterly devoid of fear. They were the color of polished obsidian, reflecting the dim light of the woods with an unsettling intensity, like 2 dark, bottomless pools. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You came," she said, her voice soft, like rustling leaves in a forgotten breeze, yet it carried an echo that seemed to fill the vast space of the woods, reverberating in their very bones. "I knew you would," Gareth gasped, his hand flying to his mouth, a mixture of relief and dawning horror on his face. "By the saints, she's alive! A miracle!" He started to rush forward, but Kalen's hand shot out, stopping him. "Are you hurt, child?" Kalen knelt, trying to meet her gaze, but her obsidian eyes seemed to look through him, beyond him, as if seeing something he could not. There was no sign of injury on her, no tears, no fear, only that unnerving calm. She shook her head slowly, her flaxen hair swaying. "No." "I'm waiting. Waiting for what, little one?" Gareth asked, stepping closer, his initial relief warring fiercely with a nascent unease that was rapidly growing into full-blown dread. The girl's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed a shade too sharp, too numerous for a child, like tiny, pearlescent needles. For them, they like new friends, especially ones who carry shiny things. Her gaze flickered to Kalen's sword, then to Gareth's, a hungry, ancient light in her dark eyes. As if on cue, a sudden, piercing shriek tore through the air, not from the girl, but from deep within the woods. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that made the hair stand up on Kalen's arms, a sound that spoke of flesh tearing and bones snapping. It was followed by a wet, sickening thud. "What was that?" Gareth demanded, his face paling, his hand instinctively gripping his sword hilt. The girl giggled, a sound that grated on Kalen's nerves, a sound devoid of innocence, filled instead with a chilling amusement. "They're playing. They always play before they eat." Before Kalen could react, before he could even process the full implication of her words, the ground beneath them began to heave. It wasn't a tremor, but a deliberate, organic movement. Roots, thick as a man's thigh, erupted from the earth, coiling and twisting like monstrous serpents, tearing through the damp soil with a sound like tearing cloth. The enormous, ancient oak behind the girl seemed to groan, its massive bark rippling as if alive, and the strange, swirling patterns on its trunk began to glow with a faint, sickly green light, pulsing in time with the girl's incessant humming. "Get back, Gareth!" Kalen roared, drawing his sword with a practiced, deadly hiss of steel. He knew with a sudden, terrible certainty that they had walked into a trap. Gareth stumbled backward, tripping over a newly risen root, his armor clanking loudly. He scrambled to his feet, his own sword drawn, his eyes wide with terror, fixed on the shifting shadows between the trees. From those shadows, from the very fabric of the woods, they emerged. Not beasts, not men, but something in between, something that defied easy categorization. Figures tall and gaunt, their limbs unnaturally long and spindly, like twisted branches, their skin like stretched, ancient bark, mottled with moss and fungi. Their heads were smooth, featureless, save for two glowing green orbs where eyes should be, burning with an internal cold fire, and a wide, lipless maw that seemed to pulsate with an inner light, revealing no teeth, only a dark, endless void. They moved with a disturbing fluidity, silent as shadows, yet radiating an aura of immense, ancient power, a primordial malevolence that made the air crackle. "The tree folk of legend," Gareth whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "But they're real, and they're not friendly." The girl, still sitting calmly by the base of the oak, clapped her hands, a slow, deliberate sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Her unsettling smile was fixed on the approaching horrors, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. "See? I told you they'd come. They love visitors." Kalen knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that these were not creatures to be fought with steel alone. They were something else, something from a forgotten age, guardians of this cursed wood, or perhaps its very manifestation. But he was a knight, sworn to protect the innocent, sworn to face down evil, no matter its form. He would not yield. "Protect the child," Kalen shouted, his voice ringing with a false bravado, though a part of him, a small, terrified voice, wondered if the child was the one who needed protecting, or if she was the bait, the spider at the center of this monstrous web. The tree folk moved with terrifying speed, a silent, deadly ballet of bark and glowing eyes. One, taller and more sinuous than the others, lunged at Gareth, its long skeletal arm extending, its hand ending in razor-sharp talons that resembled sharpened roots, capable of tearing flesh and bone. Gareth parried, his sword clanging against the creature's woody flesh, a sound like stone striking stone. But the impact sent a jarring shockwave up his arm, numbing his fingers. The creature merely recoiled slightly, its glowing eyes unwavering. Kalen engaged another, its glowing eyes fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. He swung his sword in a wide arc, aiming for its featureless head, but the creature swayed, its body blurring, its form seeming to dissolve into the shadows for a fraction of a second, and his blade passed through empty air. It was like fighting a phantom, a nightmare made flesh, solid one moment, intangible the next. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and decay, a sickly sweet aroma that made his stomach churn. The green light from the oak intensified, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch like living things, distorting reality. The girl's humming grew louder, more insistent, weaving itself into the very fabric of the woods, a hypnotic, maddening drone that burrowed into Kalen's mind, threatening to shatter his sanity. One of the tree folk, faster and more cunning than the others, darted past Kalen, its movements a blur, heading straight for the girl. Kalen roared, turning to intercept, but he was too slow, his armor weighing him down. The creature reached her, its taloned hand extended. But instead of seizing her, it gently touched her cheek, its rough, bark-like fingers surprisingly delicate. The girl leaned into the touch, her eyes closing, her smile serene, a picture of disturbing contentment. The treefolk then turned its glowing gaze back to the knights, and a low, guttural growl, like the grinding of ancient stones, or the roots of the earth shifting, emanated from its maw, a sound of immense, terrible satisfaction. "She's one of them," Gareth gasped, his face a mask of dawning horror, his voice cracking with the realization. "She's not a victim, she's a lure. They sent her." The realization struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow, a cold, crushing weight in his chest. All the missing children, the whispers, the unnatural silence. They weren't taken, they were transformed. Or perhaps, they were born of this place, ancient seeds sprouting into human form, sent out to draw new souls into the maw of the woods, to replenish the forest's macabre harvest. The treefolk pressed their attack, their movements becoming more aggressive, more coordinated, a silent, deadly dance of hunters and prey. Kalen fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, his blade a blur, a desperate flash of defiance against the overwhelming tide. But for every one he managed to strike, another seemed to materialize from the shadows, or the one he struck would simply reform, its woody flesh knitting back together with an unsettling speed. The acidic scent in the air grew stronger, burning his nostrils, making his eyes water. He could feel it stinging his exposed skin, a faint, burning itch. Gareth, overwhelmed by the sheer number and unnatural speed of the creatures, was forced back against the gnarled trunk of a smaller tree, its bark rough against his mail. A treefolk, its glowing eyes burning into his soul, advanced, its talons poised, its lipless maw opening slightly, emitting a faint, resonant hum. Gareth screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror and agony, as the creature's hand closed around his face, its sharp talons digging into his flesh. He thrashed, his struggles desperate but futile, his movements growing weak, his screams fading into choked gasps. Kalen watched in horror, helpless, as Gareth's body began to contort, his armor groaning and splitting under the unnatural transformation. His skin darkened, taking on a rough, bark-like texture, his limbs elongated, stretching and twisting into grotesque, branch-like forms. His screams turned into a wet, gurgling croak, then a series of low, guttural hums that mirrored the girl's melody. The green light from the oak pulsed brighter, and Gareth's eyes, once filled with human fear, began to glow with the same unsettling green as the treefolk, reflecting the ancient malevolence of the woods. He was changing, becoming one of them, his humanity dissolving, replaced by the essence of the forest's horror. Kalen felt a cold dread seep into his very bones, chilling him to the core. He was alone, surrounded by ancient, malevolent entities, and a child who was their silent, terrifying accomplice, a puppet master pulling invisible strings. He knew he could not win this fight. His sword was useless against such a foe, his strength meaningless against their ancient power. He looked at the girl, still sitting calmly, her eyes now open, watching Gareth's transformation with an almost scientific detachment, a quiet fascination. Her smile was wider now, more knowing, more chilling, a silent promise of what awaited him. "You're next," she whispered, her voice soft, yet carrying over the sounds of the struggle, a promise of inevitable doom, a final, chilling invitation. Kalen, his breath ragged, his body screaming with exhaustion and fear, made a desperate decision. He would not be another victim, another grotesque addition to this cursed forest. He would not become one of them. He would not join Gareth in this living death. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, a final, primal instinct for survival, he turned and ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to escape this place, this living nightmare. He ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, his armor snagging on thorns, his breath rasping in his throat. The treefolk pursued him, their silent, fluid movements unervingly fast, their glowing eyes burning holes in the darkness behind him. He could hear the rustle of their bark-like skin, the faint, high-pitched hum of their inner light drawing closer, closer. He burst through a thicket of thorns, tearing his armor, scratching his skin, leaving trails of blood on the sharp branches, but he didn't feel the pain. His mind was consumed by one thought: escape, escape or die. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs ached with exhaustion, until every muscle screamed in protest. The trees began to thin, the oppressive canopy giving way to patches of less dense forest, the light growing brighter, a faint, hopeful glimmer in the distance. He stumbled out of the woods, collapsing onto the damp earth of a familiar path, gasping for breath, his body trembling violently. He lay there for a long time, listening, his heart pounding against his ribs. The wind still whispered, but it was a different whisper now, a less malevolent one, the sounds of a normal forest slowly returning. The unsettling silence of the woods was replaced by the distant chirping of crickets, the rustle of normal leaves, the hoot of an owl. He was out. He had escaped. He had survived. But as he pushed himself up, his body aching, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed, he felt a strange sensation on his skin, a tingling, a faint itch, like something crawling beneath the surface. He looked down at his hands, caked with mud and blood. His skin, where the thorns had scratched him, was not bleeding freely. Instead, a faint, sickly green tint was beginning to spread from the cuts, like a bruise, slowly darkening, growing rougher. And his fingers, they seemed a fraction longer, a fraction more slender than he remembered, the nails hardening, thickening. He stared at his reflection in a shallow puddle, his heart seizing in his chest, a new, terrible dread eclipsing the old. His eyes, though still human, held a faint, unsettling glimmer of gold, a reflection of the ancient light he had seen in the depths of the woods. The girl's voice, soft and echoing, seemed to whisper in his mind, a chilling lullaby. You came, they like new friends, and now, you are one of us. He had escaped the woods, but the woods had not finished with him. The horror had followed him, seeped into his very being, a slow, insidious poison. He was not free. He was merely transforming. And soon, when the change was complete, he would find himself drawn back to the whispering woods, not as a knight, but as something else, something new, something that hummed a tuneless, repetitive melody and waited patiently for new friends. The horror had just begun, and Kalen, the valiant knight, was now its unwitting harbinger. The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the intoxicating scent of high-octane fuel, burnt rubber, and the nervous sweat of 1,000 spectators. The Midnight Grand Prix, an unsanctioned, underground race, was less an event and more a legend, whispered about in the dark corners of the racing world. It wasn't about prize money or fleeting fame. It was about proving you were the fastest, the most fearless, the one who could tame the treacherous, winding roads of the Blackwood Pass. And, as whispered in hushed tones that carried the weight of ancient dread, it was about surviving the pass itself, a place where the road seemed to consume those who dared to challenge it. Rory Kincaid, a man whose life was a blur of speed and adrenaline, whose very pulse seemed to beat in time with a revving engine, gripped the steering wheel of his custom-built Phantom, a sleek, raven-black machine that purred with barely contained power, a predator waiting to be unleashed. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a familiar drumbeat before a race, a symphony of anticipation and controlled fear. But tonight, there was a different note in the symphony of his nerves, a discordant hum of unease that resonated deep within his bones. He'd heard the rumors, the chilling tales of drivers who vanished without a trace, of cars found mangled beyond recognition with no bodies inside, of spectral lights dancing in the rearview mirror, mocking the living. He usually scoffed at such superstitions, dismissing them as the fanciful ramblings of the weak-minded. But the atmosphere tonight was different, heavy with an almost tangible dread that clung to the air like the humidity before a storm. His rivals lined up beside him, their machines gleaming under the harsh floodlights, each a testament to engineering and a hunger for victory. There was Viper Valerius, a cold-eyed veteran with a reputation for ruthless aggression, whose steely gaze promised no quarter. Blaze Brennan, a flamboyant newcomer whose recklessness was matched only by his blistering speed, a wild card in every race, and the enigmatic Shadow, a driver whose identity was unknown, always clad in black from head to toe, their car a featureless, matte gray blur, a silent, almost invisible menace on the track. The tension was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. The starting gun cracked, a sharp, deafening report that echoed through the night, slicing through the roar of the crowd. Engines roared, a collective beast unleashed, a primal scream of power. Tires shrieked, biting into the asphalt with desperate urgency, leaving smoking trails in their wake, and the cars launched forward, a kaleidoscope of speed and light, blurring into streaks against the dark backdrop of the pass. Rory pushed the Phantom, feeling the raw power surge through him, the acceleration pinning him back against his seat, becoming one with the machine, a seamless extension of steel and speed. Blackwood Pass lived up to its ominous name. The road was a serpentine nightmare, a ribbon of asphalt clinging precariously to the side of a sheer cliff face, dropping into a bottomless gorge on one side, a gaping maw of darkness, and rising to a dense, ancient forest on the other, its trees like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Hairpin turns followed blind crests with cruel regularity, and the narrow asphalt offered no forgiveness for error, no mercy for the hesitant. The moonlight, when it broke through the heavy, scudding clouds, cast eerie shadows that danced and writhed, playing tricks on the eyes, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque specters. Rory was in his element, his instincts honed by years of pushing limits, his reflexes a blur of precision. He took the first few turns with practiced precision, his tires kissing the very edge of disaster, the cliff face a blurred wall beside him, his mind a calculating machine, processing every variable, every nuance of the road. He passed Blaze, whose car skidded dangerously close to the cliff edge, a near miss that sent a jolt through Rory, even as he focused on his own line. He saw Viper's determined face in his rearview mirror, a grim mask of concentration, a relentless hunter on his tail. Then, the first anomaly occurred, subtle at first, easily dismissed. As he rounded a particularly tight bend known as Widow's Kiss, a faint, ethereal glow appeared in his rearview mirror, not from a car's headlights, but a soft, pulsing luminescence, like a distant, dying star. It was behind Shadow's car, which was currently a few lengths back, a silent, unsettling companion. Rory blinked, shaking his head, trying to clear his vision. Just the glare of the lights, he told himself. Fatigue, perhaps, playing tricks on his overstimulated mind. But the glow persisted, growing brighter, seeming to pulse with a life of its own, an internal rhythm that defied explanation. It wasn't static. It moved, weaving and darting behind Shadow's vehicle, almost like a phantom passenger, a silent observer in the deadly race. Rory frowned, a knot forming in his stomach, pushing the thought aside with a desperate effort. Focus on the road. Focus on the race. He pulled ahead of Shadow, the Phantom's engine screaming in protest as he redlined it, pushing the machine to its absolute breaking point. As he glanced in his mirror again, the glow was still there, but now it was closer, directly behind him, a shimmering, indistinct form in the periphery of his vision, just beyond the edge of clear sight. He felt a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature inside the cockpit, a chilling cold that seeped into his bones despite the roaring heat of the engine and his own adrenaline-fueled body. A profound shiver traced its way down his spine, a premonition of something terrible. The whispers began then, faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves in a forgotten wind, or the distant murmur of a restless crowd. They weren't words, not yet, but a cacophony of dry clicks, faint sighs, and something that sounded uncannily like stifled laughter, a cruel, mocking sound that seemed to echo from the very depths of the gorge. It seemed to emanate from the very air around him, from the shadows clinging to the ancient trees, from the endless blackness of the gorge below. Rory gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the dark leather, his heart hammering a frantic, irregular beat. The adrenaline that usually sharpened his senses now seemed to amplify his unease, turning every shadow into a lurking threat. He pushed the phantom harder, the speedometer needle trembling at its maximum, trying to outrun the unsettling presence, to leave the whispers and the cold behind. The glow in his mirror intensified, becoming a swirling vortex of pale light, growing more defined, more menacing. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, forming fragmented, chilling phrases that seemed to claw at the edges of his sanity. Faster, not fast enough. You can't escape. We are waiting. Ahead, Blaze's car suddenly swerved violently, its tires losing traction with a desperate shriek that cut through the night. It spun once, twice, a chaotic dance of metal and light, then veered off the road with a sickening crunch, disappearing into the black maw of the gorge. No explosion, no fiery wreckage, no sign of life. Just silence, profound and absolute, where a moment before there had been the roar of an engine. Rory's blood ran cold, a chilling realization dawning on him. Blaze was known for his recklessness, but not for such a catastrophic, unforced error. It was as if something had pulled him off the road, an invisible hand guiding him to his doom. The glow in Rory's mirror pulsed, brighter now, an almost blinding luminescence, and the whispers coalesced into a chilling chorus, 1,000 voices speaking as one. One down. Who's next? The past hungers. It always hungers. He glanced at his GPS, his eyes darting from the road to the flickering screen. He was nearing Devil's Backbone, a series of treacherous S-curves notorious for claiming unwary drivers, a section of the road that demanded absolute precision. He saw Viper's car ahead, a red streak against the darkness, a defiant challenge to the lurking horror. Rory pushed the Phantom to its absolute limit, the engine screaming in protest, a banshee wail in the night, the tires barely holding traction as the car danced on the edge of control. As he entered Devil's Backbone, the glowing entity in his mirror seemed to expand, filling his entire rear view, its form becoming clearer, more terrifying. He could almost make out a skeletal, elongated shape within it, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its empty eye sockets fixed on him with an ancient, malevolent gaze. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a dry, rasping chorus directly in his ears, inside his head, 1,000 voices screaming his name, demanding his surrender. We ride with you, Rory Kincaid. We ride with all who dare to challenge the past. And we claim our due, your soul, your essence, your eternity. He felt a sudden, inexplicable drag on the steering wheel, a subtle resistance that fought against his every input, a powerful, unseen force trying to wrest control from him. The Phantom began to veer, inching closer to the sheer cliff edge, the abyss beckoning. Rory wrestled with the wheel, his muscles screaming in protest, his arms burning with the effort. It was as if an invisible hand, cold and strong, was trying to force him off the road, to join the others. He saw Viper's car ahead, struggling with the same unseen force. Viper's vehicle was fishtailing wildly, its tires smoking, its driver fighting a desperate battle against an unseen adversary, a silent, unseen battle for his very life. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek of tortured metal, Viper's car was violently ripped from the road, not swerving, but literally lifted and hurled into the abyss, a silent, sickening plummet into the darkness, a flash of red disappearing into the void. Rory screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror that tore from his throat, swallowed by the roar of the wind and the whispers. He was alone now, the last one. The glowing entity was no longer just in his mirror. It was in the passenger seat, a shimmering, translucent form, its skeletal fingers, long and bony, reaching for the wheel, for his throat. The whispers were a deafening roar in his mind, 1,000 voices screaming his name, demanding his soul, promising an eternity of torment. Join us, Rory. Become one of us. Ride the past forever. Feel the wind. Feel the cold. Feel the endless hunger. He felt the cold, spectral touch on his arm, a sensation of icy dread that seeped into his very bones, chilling him to the core. His vision blurred, the road ahead twisting and distorting into a grotesque mockery of reality. He was losing control not just of the car, but of his own mind, his sanity fraying at the edges. The entity was trying to possess him, to make him another echo in the past's grim collection, another spectral driver bound to this cursed road. He remembered the rumors, the stories of drivers who vanished. They didn't crash. They were taken. Their cars found empty. Their souls bound to the past, forced to ride forever, spectral guardians of this cursed road, luring new victims into the same inescapable fate. The past was a living entity, a hungry maw that devoured souls. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, a final, defiant spark of life, Rory fought back. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, pushing the Phantom beyond its limits, beyond what he thought was possible, a desperate gamble for survival. The car surged forward, a black bullet against the night, a defiant streak against the encroaching darkness. He swerved violently, hoping to dislodge the entity, to break its hold, to shake off the spectral grip. The entity shrieked, a sound like grinding stones, a sound of pure agony, its hold momentarily weakening, its form flickering like a dying flame. Rory saw his chance, a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness. He remembered a legend, a forgotten tale of the past, whispered by old-timers around dying campfires. The ancient ones fear the light of the dawn and the true sound of life. They cannot abide the vibrant pulse of the living. He fumbled for his phone, his trembling fingers barely able to unlock it, fumbling with the touchscreen. He opened a music app, selecting a track, not a racing anthem, not a metal roar, but a vibrant, pulsating electronic beat, full of life and energy, a defiant pulse against the deathly silence. He cranked the volume to maximum, the speakers blasting the defiant rhythm into the confined space of the cockpit, the bass vibrating through the very chassis of the car. The effect was instantaneous. The glowing entity recoiled, its form flickering violently, its whispers turning into a cacophony of pained shrieks, 1,000 tormented voices crying out in agony. The music, a vibrant pulse of life, a defiant beat of human creation, was anathema to its spectral existence, a burning light against its shadow. Rory pressed his advantage, pushing the Phantom even harder, the music a shield against the encroaching darkness, a barrier against the whispers. He saw the faint glimmer of dawn on the horizon, a thin sliver of gray light breaking through the oppressive blackness, painting the sky with the promise of a new day. The entity shrieked again, its form shrinking, its power waning, dissolving into wisps of shadow. As the first direct rays of sunlight touched the treacherous road, bathing the pass in a gentle golden glow, the glowing entity in his passenger seat dissolved completely, fading into nothingness like mist in the morning sun. The whispers died, replaced by the roar of the Phantom's engine and the frantic, pounding rhythm of his own heart, a testament to his survival. Rory drove on, his body trembling uncontrollably, his mind reeling from the ordeal, the phantom chill still clinging to his skin. He reached the makeshift finish line, a solitary victor in a race that had claimed all others, a survivor of an unseen horror. He pulled the Phantom to a screeching halt, collapsing against the steering wheel, gasping for breath, the taste of fear still bitter on his tongue. He never raced again. The thrill of speed was gone, replaced by the chilling, indelible memory of the spectral riders of Blackwood Pass. He sold the Phantom, unable to bear its presence, its silent reminder of the night he had cheated death and glimpsed the true horror of the road, a horror that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. Years passed. Rory lived a quiet life, far from the roar of engines and the whispers of the wind, seeking solace in the mundane, in the comforting predictability of everyday life. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled outside his window, a sound that once brought him peace, he would hear it a faint, dry rustle, like leaves skittering across asphalt, and a chilling, high-pitched giggle just at the edge of hearing, a sound that seemed to echo from the deepest recesses of his memory. He knew the past still called, still claimed its due, still hungered for new souls. And he knew that somewhere, in the eternal darkness of Blackwood Pass, the spectral drivers still raced, their phantom cars a blur of light and shadow, waiting for the next brave fool to challenge their domain, forever trapped in the midnight Grand Prix, forever riding the cursed road. The rain began just as the final bell shrieked, a sudden, cold downpour that turned the schoolyard into a blurry watercolor of gray asphalt and bright yellow raincoats. Alara pulled her thin, threadbare jacket tighter, hunching her shoulders against the biting chill as she joined the jostling throng of students rushing for the bus. She hated the bus. It was always too loud, too crowded, a suffocating metal box that smelled faintly of stale crisps, damp wool, and the faint, sickly sweet scent of disinfectant that never quite masked the underlying grime. But today, a deeper, more profound unease settled in her stomach, a prickle of dread that had nothing to do with the weather or the usual afternoon crush. It was a cold, internal shiver that started in her gut and spread through her veins. The usual chaos of the afternoon bus ride was strangely muted, almost entirely absent. The boisterous laughter of the older boys, usually a cacophony of adolescent energy, was subdued, reduced to barely audible mumbles. The incessant chatter and playful shouts of the middle schoolers, typically a constant buzz, had dwindled to hushed, almost fearful whispers that seemed to cling to the damp air. Even the bus driver, old Mr. Henderson, usually a jovial man with a booming laugh and a penchant for bad jokes, sat hunched over the wheel, his shoulders stiff, his back unusually straight, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked road with an unusual, almost desperate intensity. The bus itself felt different, too. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and shrink with a life of their own, making the familiar interior seem alien and menacing. The engine hummed with a low, almost mournful whine, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, up through Alara's worn sneakers, and into her very bones, a resonant thrum that felt less like machinery and more like a living, breathing thing. Alara found her usual seat, 3 rows from the back, by the window, where she could press her forehead against the cool glass and watch the world go by. Her best friend, Liam, usually saved it for her. His worn backpack sprawled across the seat, a silent invitation. But today Liam wasn't there. He hadn't been at school since Tuesday, and the teachers had just said he was unwell. Their voices tight, their eyes avoiding hers. Alara knew better. Liam had told her about the dreams, his voice trembling, his eyes wide with unshed tears, dreams of twisted trees reaching like skeletal hands from a perpetual mist, of whispering shadows that promised oblivion, of a cold, grasping hand reaching for him from the darkness beneath his bed. He'd looked pale and drawn, his usual spark dimmed to a flicker, like a candle about to gutter out. He'd barely eaten, barely slept, consumed by an invisible terror. As the bus pulled away from the school, the rain intensified, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and green, transforming the familiar suburban landscape into an impressionistic blur. Alara pressed her face against the cold glass, trying desperately to distract herself, to focus on the distorted reflections of the streetlights, but her gaze kept drifting, irresistibly, to the other passengers. They seemed different. Their faces were pale, almost bloodless, their skin a sickly gray in the flickering light. Their eyes were wide and glassy, unnaturally still, fixed straight ahead, as if staring at something only they could see. They sat unnaturally stiff, their hands clasped tightly in their laps, their knuckles white, as if holding on to something precious, or perhaps holding themselves together, preventing some internal unraveling. Their breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. A small, whimpering sound, barely audible above the engine's drone, broke the heavy silence. Came from the seat directly in front of Alara. A first grader, little Timmy, was clutching a worn teddy bear, its once fluffy fur matted and damp. His face was buried deep in its comforting embrace, but his shoulders shook with silent, convulsive sobs that seemed to vibrate through the seat back. His older sister, Sarah, usually so protective of her little brother, sat rigidly beside him, staring blankly out the window, seemingly oblivious to his distress, her face a mask of serene emptiness. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dampness seeping into her jacket. It was the chill of fear, cold and sharp. She leaned forward, gently tapping Sarah on the shoulder, her voice a hesitant whisper. "Sarah, is Timmy okay? He's crying." Sarah didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the rain-streaked window, unblinking, unseeing. Alara tapped her again, a little harder, a faint tremor in her hand. Still nothing. Sarah's skin looked unnaturally waxy, almost translucent, in the flickering, erratic light, like old porcelain. A faint, almost imperceptible greenish tint seemed to shimmer beneath the surface of her skin, visible only when the lights flared brightest. A sudden, violent lurch of the bus sent a ripple through the passengers. Not a normal bump in the road, but a deliberate, almost organic shift, as if the bus itself had sighed. A collective sigh, like a soft exhalation of breath from 1,000 lungs, swept through the bus, a faint, rustling sound that made the hairs on Alara's neck stand on end. Alara pulled back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape. The bus continued its journey, taking what seemed to be the usual route, but each stop felt wrong, profoundly wrong. At the first stop, Mrs. Gable's house, a quaint cottage with a vibrant rose garden. No one got off. Mrs. Gable, a kindly old woman who always had a smile and a wave for the children, stood on her porch, a brightly colored umbrella clutched in her hand, her face pale, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea that Alara could almost feel. Mr. Henderson merely drove past, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as if he hadn't even seen her. At the next stop, the corner where the twins, Emily and Ben, usually raced off the bus, laughing and shouting, their backpacks bouncing. Today, they remained in their seats, their identical faces expressionless, their eyes vacant, reflecting the flickering lights like polished stones. Their mother stood at the bus stop, a worried frown on her face that slowly morphed into a look of growing panic, then outright terror, as the bus sped by, leaving her standing alone in the rain. Alara felt a knot of ice forming in her stomach, expanding, spreading through her chest. The bus wasn't stopping. It was just driving, and the passengers, they weren't reacting. They were like dolls, frozen in place, their silent, glassy stares fixed on some unseen point in the distance, a destination known only to them. She tried to call out, to scream, to shatter the suffocating silence, but her throat felt constricted, as if a cold, invisible hand was squeezing it, stealing her voice. She tried to move, to get up, to run to the front of the bus, but her limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as if she were moving through thick mud, or as if she were submerged in cold, viscous water. A strange, metallic taste filled her mouth, like old pennies left too long in the rain, or the taste of blood. The humming of the bus engine grew louder, deeper, transforming into a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate inside her skull, a sound that was no longer mechanical but organic, alive. The fluorescent lights flickered faster, more violently, casting the interior of the bus in a strobe-like effect, making the still, pale faces of the passengers seem to twitch and distort, their features melting and reforming in the erratic light. The shadows danced, growing longer, reaching, twisting into grotesque shapes. Alara glanced at Timmy again. He was still whimpering, but now his whimpers were growing fainter, more distant, like an echo fading into nothingness. His teddy bear had slipped from his grasp, lying forgotten on the grimy floor. His eyes, once wide with tears, were now open, staring, and they held the same vacant, glassy quality as Sarah's, as everyone else's. The faint greenish tint on his skin was more pronounced now, like a delicate film of algae. A faint, sickly sweet smell, like the lingering scent of old flowers on a grave, or the cloying perfume of decay, began to permeate the air. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, then grew stronger, cloying, thick, making Alara's head swim, her stomach churn. It was the smell of something ancient, something that had been buried and was now stirring. She looked out the window again. The familiar houses and shops, the comforting landmarks of her neighborhood, had given way entirely to dense, unfamiliar woods. The trees were unnaturally tall and dark, their branches gnarled and twisted into grotesque, skeletal forms, their leaves a deep, unnatural green, even in the driving rain, shimmering with an internal light. This wasn't her neighborhood. This wasn't the way home. This was nowhere she had ever seen before. A low, guttural sound, like a deep sigh or a groan from the very earth, emanated from the front of the bus. Mr. Henderson. He was still hunched over the wheel, his grip unyielding, but his head was tilted at an unnatural angle, his neck twisted. His skin, visible at the nape of his neck and along his jawline, was no longer the healthy tanned color Elara remembered. It was pale, almost translucent, and the faint, sickly green tint was now spreading rapidly across it, like moss growing on stone, deepening with every passing second. His eyes, in the rearview mirror, caught hers for a fleeting moment, and they glowed with the same unsettling green light as the trees outside. The bus slowed, the engine's hum deepening into a resonant drone, then came to a gentle, almost imperceptible stop. Not at a bus stop, not on a paved road, but in the middle of a clearing in the dark, ancient woods. The rain had ceased, as if on command, and an eerie, profound silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the bus engine and the faint, unsettling hum that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves, a low, hypnotic vibration. The bus door hissed open, not onto the usual asphalt and pavement, but onto a path of dark, damp earth, winding deeper into the woods, swallowed by the encroaching shadows. The air outside was thick with the cloying, sweet smell, now almost overpowering, a suffocating perfume that filled Elara's lungs. One by one, the passengers began to stir, not with a sudden jolt, not with the awakening of consciousness, but with a slow, deliberate movement, like puppets whose strings were being gently pulled by an unseen hand. They rose from their seats, their movements stiff and uncoordinated, their limbs moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. Their glassy eyes, still fixed straight ahead, held no recognition, no emotion, only that unsettling, blank stare. Timmy, his small body stiff and unyielding, stood up, his hand reaching out for Sarah's. Sarah, in turn, took his hand, her grip unnaturally firm, her fingers intertwining with his with a disturbing precision. They began to file out of the bus, a silent, ghostly procession of pale, unblinking children and teenagers, their faces devoid of emotion, their movements like automatons. They walked slowly, deliberately, down the path into the dark woods, their forms disappearing one by one into the deepening shadows, swallowed by the ancient trees. Elara watched them go, paralyzed by a terror that rooted her to her seat, a fear so profound it stole her breath. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide, to claw her way back to the world she knew, but her body wouldn't obey. Her muscles felt like lead, her will trapped within her own skull. The metallic taste in her mouth grew stronger, a bitter tang, and the faint, sickly green tint she had seen on Mr. Henderson's neck seemed to shimmer at the edges of her vision, encroaching, consuming. Then a voice, not a human voice, not a whisper, but a soft, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate from the very air around her, from the seats, from the floor, from the walls of the bus itself, from the engine, from the trees outside. It was the same tuneless, repetitive melody she had heard the little girl humming in her dreams, the one Liam had described, a melody that was both ancient and utterly alien. "Come," the hum whispered, 1,000 voices in one, soft and inviting, yet filled with an ancient, unspeakable hunger, a promise of absorption, of becoming. "It's time for your last stop. It's time to join us." Elara felt her own limbs begin to stiffen, a creeping paralysis spreading from her toes upwards. Her head tilted to the side, involuntarily, her gaze fixing on the open bus door, on the dark path leading into the heart of the woods. Her eyes, she realized with a dawning horror that was quickly fading, were no longer focusing. They were becoming still, glassy, reflecting the flickering fluorescent lights with an unnerving intensity, mirroring the eyes of those who had gone before her. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that was not her own. The metallic taste in her mouth grew stronger, yet no longer unpleasant, but strangely comforting, familiar. The sickly sweet scent filled her lungs, not cloying now, but a soothing, intoxicating perfume. The green tint was spreading, a cool, soothing sensation across her skin, a transformation that felt less like a curse and more like a homecoming. She stood up, her movements stiff, deliberate like the others. She walked down the aisle, her bare feet, when had she taken off her shoes? She couldn't remember. Making no sound on the grimy floor, her steps silent, precise. She passed Mr. Henderson, still hunched over the wheel, his head now fully turned, his eyes glowing with the same unsettling green light as the trees outside. He looked at her, and a silent, knowing hum resonated from him, a greeting, a welcome to their collective. Alara stepped off the bus, onto the damp earth, the cool soil yielding beneath her feet. The air was cool against her skin, and the hum of the woods enveloped her, a lullaby, a welcome, a chorus of 1,000 silent voices. She joined the silent procession, her steps falling into rhythm with theirs, her gaze fixed on the winding path, on the glowing green eyes that awaited her in the shadows. She felt no fear, no sadness, no regret, only a profound sense of peace, of belonging. She was going home, to her new home, to join the others. The bus, its engine still thrumming with that low, resonant hum, sat silently in the clearing, its lights flickering, waiting for the next group of passengers. The last stop was never truly the last. It was just the beginning of a new journey, into the heart of the woods, into the silent, green embrace of the ancient, hungry things that waited there. And soon, another bus would arrive, another group of children, ready for their own last stop. The hospital room was bathed in the soft glow of the night light, a comforting beacon in the otherwise sterile environment. Sarah watched her newborn, Lily, sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed. Lily was tiny, perfect, a miracle of soft skin and delicate features, barely a day old. Yet, despite the overwhelming joy that swelled in Sarah's chest, a faint, discordant note hummed beneath the surface. It was a whisper of unease, a feeling she couldn't quite shake since the moment Lily had been placed in her arms. It wasn't the usual new parent anxiety, the fear of doing something wrong, or the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. This was different. It was a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, a prickling sensation on her skin that suggested unseen eyes. She dismissed it as sleep deprivation, the lingering effects of the epidural, or simply the overwhelming emotional intensity of childbirth. Her husband, Tom, a man of unwavering practicality, had already succumbed to sleep in the armchair by the window, his gentle snores a familiar comfort. Sarah, however, found herself staring into the dimness, listening. The hospital was usually a symphony of hushed footsteps, distant beeps, and the occasional murmur of voices. Tonight, it felt unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. Lily stirred, a tiny sigh escaping her lips. Sarah leaned over, her heart melting at the sight of her daughter's miniature perfection. As she watched, a fleeting shadow seemed to pass over Lily's face, too quick to be real, too subtle to be anything but a trick of the light. Sarah blinked and it was gone. The first incident occurred that very night. Sarah had finally drifted into a fitful sleep when a sound jolted her awake. It wasn't Lily crying. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the bassinet. Top, top, top. Sarah's heart pounded. She sat up, her eyes straining in the dim light. Lily was still asleep, but her tiny hand, no bigger than a teacup, was moving. Her index finger was tapping gently, repeatedly, against the plastic side of the bassinet. Sarah frowned. Newborns didn't do that. It was too deliberate, too coordinated. She reached out, gently taking Lily's hand in hers. The tapping stopped. Lily's fingers curled around Sarah's own, a surprisingly strong grip. Sarah held her breath, waiting. Nothing. She attributed it to a reflex, a random twitch. Yet, the image of that tiny, tapping finger lingered, unsettling her. They brought Lily home 2 days later, to their cozy, sun-filled house on the edge of town. The nursery, painted a soothing lavender and adorned with whimsical cloud decals, felt like a sanctuary. For a few days, the initial unease receded, replaced by the chaotic, joyful rhythm of new parenthood. Diaper changes, sleepless nights, the overwhelming scent of baby lotion, and the sheer wonder of watching Lily discover the world around her. But the incidents returned, subtle at first, then increasingly unnerving. The tapping in the bassinet became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by a faint scratching sound, as if tiny nails were dragging across the plastic. Sarah would rush in, her heart in her throat, only to find Lily sleeping soundly, her hands tucked innocently beside her head. Then came the whispers. Sarah would be in the living room folding laundry when she'd hear them. Faint, breathy sounds, like someone murmuring just beyond the threshold of hearing. They seemed to emanate from the nursery. She'd creep to the door, pressing her ear against the wood, but the moment she did, the whispers would cease. When she opened the door, the nursery would be quiet, Lily sleeping soundly in her crib. Tom, bless his pragmatic heart, dismissed it all. "You're tired, honey?" he'd say, pulling her into a comforting hug. "New moms hear things. It's the exhaustion playing tricks on you." He'd point to the baby monitor, silent and still. "See? Nothing." But Sarah knew. She knew the difference between exhaustion and genuine dread. The whispers weren't her imagination. They were real, and they were getting clearer. Sometimes, she thought she could almost make out words, fragmented syllables that seemed to coalesce into something chillingly familiar. One afternoon, she was changing Lily's diaper when she noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible mark on Lily's inner thigh. It looked like a tiny bruise, no bigger than a pinprick, but it was perfectly round, almost too perfect. Sarah's stomach clenched. She remembered a story, an old wives' tale, about birthmarks and souls. She quickly dismissed it, blaming it on a stray nail or a clumsy diaper change. But the image of that perfect circle stayed with her. The whispers grew bolder. Sarah started hearing them even when she wasn't near the nursery. In the kitchen while making coffee. In the shower, the water muffling the faint, sibilant sounds. They were always just out of reach, just beyond comprehension, but their presence was undeniable. One night, Lily was particularly fussy. Sarah rocked her gently, humming a lullaby, trying to soothe her. As she swayed, she heard it, clear as a bell, directly from Lily's tiny mouth. A whisper, not a baby's gurgle, but a distinct, breathy sound. "No." Sarah froze. Her blood ran cold. She stared down at Lily, who was now looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. Couldn't be. Newborns didn't talk. Not like that. She tried to rationalize it. A gas bubble, a random sound. But the word, "no," resonated in her mind, chilling her to the bone. The following week, the baby monitor began to act strangely. Static would crackle through it at odd hours, even when Lily was sleeping soundly. Sometimes, a faint, distorted voice would cut through the static, too garbled to understand, but undeniably human. Tom blamed interference, old wiring. Sarah, however, felt a growing certainty that something was trying to communicate. She started spending her nights awake, watching Lily, listening to the whispers, trying to decipher their meaning. Her sleep deprivation became extreme, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed, her nerves frayed. Tom grew increasingly concerned, urging her to see a doctor to get some rest. But Sarah couldn't rest, not with this growing dread in her heart. One particularly dark and stormy night, the power flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Tom was out working late. Sarah was alone with Lily. The sudden silence was deafening. punctuated only by the drumming of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. She fumbled for her phone, its flashlight beam a weak comfort against the oppressive blackness. She made her way to the nursery, her heart pounding. Lily was stirring in her crib, a soft whimper escaping her lips. As Sarah reached the crib, the air in the room dropped several degrees. A cold, damp chill that smelled faintly of mildew and old earth. The whispers erupted, louder than ever, swirling around her, a cacophony of sibilant sounds. They were no longer fragmented. They were forming words. "She is ours," Sarah gasped, stumbling back. She clutched her chest, her breath catching in her throat. The words were clear, distinct, coming from all around her, yet seeming to originate from the crib itself. Lily began to cry, a thin, reedy wail that was quickly drowned out by the rising crescendo of whispers. Sarah's phone slipped from her trembling fingers, plunging the room into darkness once more. She could hear Lily's cries, but they sounded different now, distorted, as if two voices were crying at once, Lily's innocent wail, and something else, something ancient and guttural. A faint, sickly green light began to emanate from the crib, casting eerie shadows on the lavender walls. Sarah's eyes, wide with terror, focused on the source. It was Lily. Her tiny body was glowing with an unnatural luminescence, and her eyes, usually a soft blue, were now a piercing, malevolent green. And then she saw it, the mark, the perfectly round, pinprick bruise on Lily's thigh. It was glowing too, a tiny, pulsating green orb. The whispers intensified, swirling around Sarah, pressing in on her, filling her mind with a chilling realization. This wasn't her baby, not entirely. Something else was here, something ancient, something that had taken root within Lily. The exchange. The whispers hissed, closer now, right in her ear. "The debt is paid." Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure horror and grief. She stumbled towards the crib, her hands outstretched, desperate to reclaim her child, to fight off whatever malevolent entity had invaded her daughter. As her fingers brushed against the bars of the crib, a cold, invisible force slammed into her, throwing her back against the wall. She hit her head with a sickening thud, the world spinning. Her vision blurred, but she could still see the green glow, the tiny, glowing eyes, the perfect round mark pulsating with dark energy. She heard Tom's car pull into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel. Hope surged through her, a desperate, fleeting beacon. He would help. He would make it stop. The front door opened, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. Tom's voice, confused, concerned. "Sarah, what's going on?" "Power's out." The whispers in the nursery grew frantic, a whirlwind of sibilant sounds. The green glow intensified, bathing Lily's face in an unholy light. And then, a sound that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. A deep, guttural laugh emanating from Lily's tiny form. A laugh that was ancient, cruel, and utterly devoid of innocence. Tom's footsteps pounded up the stairs. Sarah, despite the throbbing pain in her head, pushed herself up, crawling towards the nursery door, desperate to warn him, to protect him. He reached the doorway, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene. His eyes, wide with shock, landed on Lily, glowing green in the crib. On Sarah, bruised and bleeding on the floor. What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The creature in the crib, wearing Lily's perfect face, turned its head slowly towards Tom. The green eyes gleamed. The ancient, chilling laugh echoed through the room. "Welcome home." The voice hissed, a chorus of whispers emanating from Lily's mouth. Tom dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, its beam flickering erratically, casting grotesque shadows. He stood frozen, paralyzed by the sight, by the sound, by the unimaginable horror that had invaded their home, taken root in their child. Sarah watched, helpless, as the creature in the crib extended a tiny, glowing hand towards Tom. Not Lily's hand, something else, something long and skeletal with sharp, needle-like fingers. The whispers swirled around Tom, encircling him, pressing in. He gasped, his body stiffening. His eyes rolled back in his head. He crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The green glow in the crib slowly faded. The whispers died down, replaced by the innocent gurgle of a newborn baby. Lily, sleeping peacefully, her tiny hands tucked beside her head. Sarah lay there, broken, her mind shattered. The house was silent again, save for the drumming of rain against the windows. The power flickered back on, bathing the nursery in a soft, normal light. Lily was just a baby, her baby. Perfect, innocent, but Sarah knew. She knew the truth that lurked beneath the surface of that perfect skin, behind those innocent eyes. The tapping, the whispers, the mark, the ancient, malevolent entity that had claimed her daughter, her husband, and her life. She never spoke of it. No one would believe her. They would say she was mad, consumed by grief, by postpartum psychosis. She would hold Lily, feed her, change her, watch her grow. And every day she would see it. The faint, perfectly round mark on Lily's thigh. The occasional, fleeting glint of green in her eyes. The way she sometimes tapped her tiny finger against the side of the crib. A soft, rhythmic sound that echoed the whispers of a terrible, ancient secret. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. A silence that was not peaceful, but heavy with unspoken dread. Sarah lived in that silence, a prisoner in her own home, haunted by the knowledge that the child she held was not entirely her own, that a piece of something dark and ancient had been exchanged, and that the debt, though paid in blood and sanity, would never truly be settled. The cradle's whisper had become her eternal nightmare.